Well, it being 7 o'clock, we might as well get started. Okay, is that all right with everybody?
Yeah.
Let me just, now we have high tech, you know, I brought paper, but with the agenda up on the board as well. So tonight, basically, I wanted to say at least a couple of things for maybe people that would be seeing this on tape. The Wastewater Committee's been working for quite some time to develop a group of alternatives that would meet the town's requirements to come into compliance with the Clean Water Act, also known as the 208 process. Come on in, come on in. Come on in. And basically what's going on in Wellfleet Harbor, near as we can understand it at this point, is there's basically a lack of balance between supply of nutrients or nitrogen and demand for nutrients or nitrogen. And that imbalance has been something that's been occurring over time as various changes have occurred to the ecosystem. And so man's had a number of impacts on the surrounding territory as well as within the harbor itself, within the marine environment. And as time has gone by, this problem's gotten worse and worse.
Point of order, Kurt. You haven't called the meeting to order.
I thought we did.
Just sort of informally.
Is it at 7 o'clock? Would anybody have any
Yeah,
objections?
you didn't call it to order though.
Okay, well, we're in session.
Okay.
And so so basically, as the water quality data has been indicating, we've been seeing some new data that's come in recently. The trends have gotten worse and worse in terms of the levels of nitrogen in the harbor. The amount of imbalance is also causing something called black mayo in the harbor. The black mayo problem has been getting worse and worse. That's sort of something that people see and observe in the bottom. At the end of the day, we've got some pretty specific requirements from the Department of Environmental Protection to reduce nitrogen in the harbor and to get it to within levels that it considers within compliance. And so that's basically been our charge, and the committee's been working for a number of years to develop a list of alternatives, things that could be used that both DEP will recognize and are quote-unquote legal to use, as well as expand the list to a list that would be as comprehensive as we possibly can make it. And tonight is the first presentation that Scott Horsley will provide that sort of goes over a list of the alternatives that have been working their way through the process as potential alternatives. This isn't by any means a recommended list. Certainly this is the beginning of the process, not the end of the process, to begin to identify those alternatives and to begin public conversations around the costs and benefits of each of the alternatives and basically look at how they may compare with each other, have conversations around those costs and benefits so that we can start to move towards some consensus on how we can move forward. I think as anybody can tell from the amount of mayo, black mayo that we've got in the harbor and from the water quality data, the harbor water quality has declined precipitously, and it's bad and it's getting worse. So our need to take action is pretty important, and it's I think without anything further, Scott, if you want to just go ahead and.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, should I stand or sit? Sitting okay, or?
Whatever you want to do.
I'll try to speak up here.
Either way.
Okay, so I'm Scott Horsley, and thank you for inviting me tonight. I've been working with Kurt and Hillary and others from the town on this project for 6 or 8 months now. It is a project we're coordinating with Mass DEP, who has offered to assist the town in our efforts, and we've had, I think, 3 meetings with them so far, and more are planned. The overall goal is to develop the information necessary for the town to apply for a watershed permit and hopefully get it. And during the meetings with Mass DEP, we've tried to identify exactly what that's going to require. And I'll try to outline that for you tonight and give you an idea of where we're at. And maybe I'll just kind of jump in here. How do I advance the slides here, Kurt? This one? Here we go. Just a closer up view. I guess I could presume that everybody's read the MEP report for Wellfleet, but it is 257 pages, I believe, so there's a lot there. I'm on my 7th or 8th run through it. I'm still finding stuff that was new to me, so there's a lot of information. So these are the primary watersheds and embayments according to that MEP study. And without getting into great specifics on each embayment, the MEP study provides the framework and thresholds for each one of these sub-embayments, as they call them. So the goal is, in fact, the requirement under the Clean Water Act that Mass DEP will require is that we meet the nitrogen requirements in not only as a whole of the Wellfleet Harbor system, but in each one of these sub-embayments. And just to give you an idea of that, this is a table from that report, table 8-3, which provides a summary of current conditions. Now, I should mention that the data collected for this study was close to 10 years ago, I guess, at this point.
2006.
Yeah, so these numbers represent that. There may have been some small changes since then, but these are the numbers we're working with. So as of that date, these are the primary 7 sub-embayments, as they're called. You can see this first column, the so-called present load in kilograms per day. This is nitrogen. The threshold load is the level that we need to get to have compliance with the Clean Water Act. And then the last column is the percent change needed to get there. And all of these numbers can be converted into kilograms per day needed to be reduced, kilograms per year needed to be reduced, and we have all those facts and figures, but this is a quick summary. So overall, you can see that the most challenging areas are Duck Creek and the Cove, where I've been focusing a lot of my efforts, because those are the most challenging. And then you can see the harbor as a whole, and Logie Bay, probably, and Blackfish Creek close to that. Herring River, according to this study, suggests that it's pretty close to threshold, and not a lot of nitrogen reduction required, but close to that. But you can see it's on the order. In most places we're talking about a half reduction or a 2/3 reduction, which is pretty challenging. For those not familiar with other Cape Cod estuaries, this is not uncommon with the estuaries along the southern side of Cape Cod. Some of the estuaries I'm working in are requiring 80%, 85% removal. So this is in the mix, and it's challenging, but it's not unusual for Cape Cod, at least for the embayments on the south side.
Why are you using the pre-existing conditions instead of the build-out conditions?
Well, there is some build-out information in the report, and as I'll get to a little bit later, I think the best way to look at strategies would be to tackle the existing sources and then get in place growth control measures to accommodate future growth. That was really the directive out of the 208 plan, but that's going to be up to the town. So it would be possible to do more reduction now to anticipate more growth, assuming that growth would be on standard Title V systems, which may or may not be a good assumption. So that would be up to the town. So I think what you're suggesting is maybe the town should go further than this and accommodate additional growth. If that's the suggestion, that we can certainly do that.
Well,
the data's there.
2011, there's been 131 new
Yep.
starts in the town.
Yep.
We're averaging a little bit over 12 new sites being built per year.
Right, and that's why I mentioned this data is as of a certain date. There are other things changing. There's less nitrogen in the rainfall. There's moving targets here. So this is a point in time, and the town has every right to choose a higher standard to accommodate, build out additional development, but the requirement in this, as of this study, are these numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize too, it's when you're talking about build-outs, or you're talking about the human contribution, that's certainly one part of it. but there's two parts. So that would be, some level of supply of nutrients. The other thing is demand for nutrients. And so it's trying to bring these two things back into balance that's critical to get our harbor into compliance. We've lost over, John would have a better number for the amount of salt marsh that we've lost in Wellfleet Harbor specifically, but within Massachusetts, estimates are over 60% loss in salt marsh. We've lost I think our Wellfleet shellfish population is probably only about 10% of what it historically used to be. The herring population is substantially lower than it used to be. And so those are some of the components that are part of the demand for nutrients, in addition to what's going on the supply side. So again, to get us back into balance and to get into a threshold compliance regime, we need to be looking at both components.
So based on the MEP's calculations in terms of wastewater load for new buildings, the additional new buildings have added over 600 kilograms per year to the base water load loading of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already hit the numbers for the alternative build-out scenario, and we still have a ways to go. There's been 98 new IA systems in the town in that time period, but they don't really make much of a dent in terms of the overall impact of the additional new construction.
In terms of nitrogen removal, and I'm going to address that tonight. I have some slides on that, so
And
thank you.
I would say that 131 new units is low. That just includes new starts. It doesn't include additions or more than one unit per site, or more intensive use of pre-existing home space, which is one of the things that MEP pointed out could happen.
Is there anything like new systems, new Federal 5 systems, or anything that would offset some of that?
The IAs offset a little bit of it, but overall, that's small. I mean, the overall percent of new builds per year of the total overall number of building permits issued is roughly 3%, a little bit under 3%. So we're having a significant number of building permits issued every year, in addition to what the new starts are.
Okay, so this is, I think, a slide out of the 208 plan, and it's a quick summary of all of the so-called strategies or techniques. I know you can't read all of this, and I'll summarize it for you, and then we're going to go into some details here, but I'll just summarize them as groups of things. And you can see that they were organized by, first of all, scale, some things that are done on-site, individual home, up to a neighborhood, a watershed, and then some things that could be done Cape-wide. And then over here, this middle section would be things to reduce existing sources, primarily at the source, like a INA septic system, or in here is a conventional wastewater treatment system. Down here is remediation, things that are either intercept the nitrogen on its way to the bay or remove nitrogen within the water column, such as shellfish. So this is just a quick organization, and when we did the 208 plan, I served as a consultant to the Cape Cod Commission. We looked at over, 60 different options. We took what they did in the Chesapeake Bay, and then we added about 10 more options to and these were studied at length, and the 208 report does provide a very good summary of each one. I've been drawing from this pool of tools to look at Wellfleet's situation. I've now done 4 plans to try to meet these targets using what we call non-traditional approaches. So there are a number of different combinations of technologies one could use to get there, and ultimately it'll be up to the town to decide which tools you want to use, which ones you think are most appropriate, etc. This is kind of the overview of the different technologies that are out there. The other document that I put in here is a figure from the Environmental Partners Report, and this is kind of a key for me to talk a little bit about centralized wastewater treatment, because in our meetings with Mass DEP, it's become extremely clear that the plan that the town puts forward as a application for a watershed permit must contain as a backup plan a conventional centralized wastewater treatment plan. doesn't need to be designed, permitted, or built, but a conceptual plan is required in the plan. So I pulled out this figure because one thing that it did do is identify potential sites throughout the town for a potential wastewater treatment plant and disposal facility. The site that we've been looking at, based upon input from the people we're working with, is the transfer station as perhaps the best site to be considered. So that's one that we're looking at to potentially put in the plan to go forward with this watershed permit. Now, we've been looking at that site. This is a map that the Cape Cod Commission prepared, and you can see that this is the parcel boundaries, and this is the transfer station. The landfill's over here, and there's a good piece of land out back here, which looks like it's large enough in size, and from our calculations, the maximum, if you only use centralized treatment to address all of the town's needs, that will be around 400,000 gallons per day wastewater treatment plant. And that's what will be required to reduce all the nitrogen loads, if in fact, and nobody thinks that will ultimately happen, because clearly there will be other tools that will be employed, but worst case is it would be about 400,000 gallons per day, and that converts to about a 3-acre footprint for a leaching facility. So 3 acres does fit, and I'll draw a triangle. We've been looking at different areas, or a rectangle, something about that size is 3 acres. So first step is geographically, is the land big enough to accommodate it? And it looks like it is, which is good news. The second thing is this topography on here, contours, elevations. And there was some groundwater work done at the landfill a number of years ago, which identified groundwater table. And this shows surface elevations. So subtracting those two, it looks as though we've got more than 20 feet of groundwater throughout that area that I identified, which is more than enough to accommodate the required depth of groundwater, which is another criteria for identifying a site. One of the third criteria is it permeable enough to accept the wastewater? And that's something that the town's going to have to do, is some on-site tests to verify that. We've looked at the superficial geology in the area. I went through the Board of Health files for all of these properties up here to look at what were the perk rates, and they all look good in terms of fast. So every indication is that this would be suitable in terms of a percolation infiltration rate. So it looks as though it meets 3 primary criteria: area, depth of groundwater, and permeability. The permeability has to be confirmed with an on-site study, and I provided Hillary a scope of work to go out and hire somebody to do that work, which Mass DEP is very clear that they're requiring to get done. Frankly, it's a pretty small piece of work compared to what is normally done to verify these sites. So it's, I think, a pretty reasonable request. It probably involves putting in a series of 3 or 4 wells, doing what's called the slug test, measuring how fast the water percolates, and then doing some other calculations. So that's the next step to evaluate this site. One of the other things that has come up is the Herring River, because if this were to be used for wastewater treatment, the idea would be to sewer other areas of town, pump the wastewater to the site, treat it, and dispose of it here. So in a sense, it's a transfer of nitrogen from other watersheds and embayments to this watershed. Now, as I said in the earlier slide, of virtually everything else in the town, Herring River looks like it's the place that is least impacted by nitrogen currently. There's also some good suggestions that the proposed project with the Herring River might make that even a better situation in terms of more nitrogen removal. So from that standpoint, it looks like a reasonable place in terms of those 4 criteria. I'm not saying it's the best. In fact, I don't know the town has ever said that that's the best site and it's perfect. That just never happens. There's always something, some challenges, but given the options, this looks like a reasonable site, at least on paper, to put in the plan. Whether or not the town goes down that road further, that is up to future efforts. But right now, to get the watershed permit, which is what I understood is the goal here, DEP wants to see a backup plan. It doesn't mean that the town can change your plan and say, we're not going to go there, we're going to go over here. DEP will say, fine, we have no problem. But they want a plan to show that it can be done in one location. So that's what we're trying to establish here. And that's been a focus of my work over the last month or so, trying to assemble with a lot of help from the town staff, what do we have for information on that site? We provided that to Mass DEP, and then they've responded with a pretty clear list of what else would be required. So that's where we're at with the centralized treatment option, and I'll come back to that at the end of my presentation. Now, the primary source of nitrogen, as I think everybody knows, is on-site septic systems. The number always seems to come in around 80%, regardless of what watershed you're in across the Cape, and that's about the right number for Wellfleet. So this is a quick diagram of a standard septic system. Wastewater goes to a septic tank, then to a leach field, and then it leaches to groundwater. There is some nitrogen removal in the system, probably on the order of something like 20% of the nitrogen that comes out of the house disappears within the system due to some denitrification and volatilization. However, it's pretty minimal. So this is the source. This is the primary source. So first thing I want to talk about, I really want to zero in on 4 technologies that I think are the ones that should seriously be considered. There are others on the list, and we can talk about this tonight and at future meetings, but I thought for tonight's purpose, because I've been looking at this for about a year now, and going through the list over and over, talking with people. And one of them is, as was already mentioned, is innovative and alternative septic systems. Now I want to go through some real current updates, because your comments, Ryan, are absolutely right. The systems that are out there currently have minimal benefit. The records on this is somewhat improved, but it's questionable whether it's cost effective. So I want to tell you about 3 systems that we are studying as part of a project with EPA and DEP in the town of Barnstable. There's a large grant, and those of you familiar with George Hoyfelder from the Barnstable County Health Department, he's part of our study group. So it's actually the County Health, EPA, Office of Research and Development, the Nature Conservancy, I didn't mention them, in the town of Barnstable. The plan is to put in somewhere in the order of 60 or 100 of the systems I'm going to tell you about, the new ones, and document whether or not they can actually achieve a much higher level of nitrogen. Okay. There have been a number of studies. In fact, George runs the Septic System Test Center at the Mass Military Reservation, and all of the systems I'm going to tell you about have already been tested there and are demonstrating something on the order of 85 to 90% removal of nitrogen as compared with the other standard INA systems that are on the market today that are getting on between 25% and 50%. So these new, what we call enhanced INA systems, looks like they remove about the same amount of nitrogen that a centralized wastewater treatment plant would. Question, Ryan?
So I reached out to the Barnstable, Barnstable, whatever the alliance is that's doing that study, and they didn't get back to me.
The Cape Cod Test Center?
No.
George's group?
No, they're putting out the units out into Barnstable.
One of the technologies?
Yep. So is it the layer cake technology?
Well, I'm going to go through them right now.
All right.
Yep. So one of them that's been selected as part of this study is something called the Nitro System. This is something that's been developed by an engineer out on Martha's Vineyard, actually, who was with Alcoa Company and did a lot of treatment design, and he's focused his life now on this system. George has this at the test center, and the data on this looks extremely good. I should also just take an aside here and explain how the INA, or Innovative and Alternative Septic System, permitting works. So anybody can propose a new technology, right? Come up with an idea, and what you have to do is apply to DEP, and you go through 3 phases of testing: pilot, provisional, and general use. For the town to start saying, we require these, put them in, it has to be general use. And to get there, you need about 65 installations tested, verified by DEP. So this system, actually all 3 systems I'm going to show you are either in pilot or provisional status. So what's between the current situation and the general permitting is number of systems installed. And that's why this study in Barnstable, they're seeking to invest several $1 million to get these in the ground, because every indication is they're going to work. They're going to work very well, and then they'll be available for general application. And this is something that we hope is going to happen over the next year or 2. The funding is already in place for the study. So this system is called the Nitro System, and as you can see, compared to a standard septic tank that goes to the leach field, there's an intermediary tank, and it's filled with a combination of wood chips aeration chamber, and this one doesn't show it, but limestone as well for pH adjustment. And that's basically how that system works. There is an air pump required on this thing, very low-powered air pump. That's essentially that system.
Do the wood chips and the lime have to be, really, they gotta be replaced or?
Absolutely. Every technology, centralized, Title V, has some replacement over time. They all do. So this will, and there's the actual time span has not been nailed down because there's been so few of these in, although there's some very good research up at University of Waterloo on this technology that suggests this is on the order of decades, in fact, maybe many decades in terms of the replacement, but that's based upon a study done in Canada.
Well, I'm just talking about the
wood chips.
Yeah, like the wood chips.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, it's like decades before you have to change it.
That's the indication from the primary research. As I said, there's only about 4 or 5 of these systems in the ground right now.
Okay.
Until we get to 65, DEP is going to say, we don't have the answer to that question yet. So they're going to look at the degradation of wood over time.
Got it.
And then project that, but we need the data.
Yeah, got it.
There's a researcher up in Waterloo who has about 20 years of data on something that's very similar. And those of us who have been reading the studies suggest this is going to work the same, but you know how it is, you got to test this exact thing to make sure that in fact that's the case. So that's why the research, on-site research is needed.
So Scott, just to clarify, the initial pilot installation, or the larger pilot installation, is going to occur in approximately a year, correct?
Yes.
And then how long from that installation to when could potentially receive provisional use, and from there?
Probably
general
2 to
use?
3 years.
Okay.
But what I'm getting at is this something, what we're talking about here is developing a plan.
No,
for
that's
the
a lot
town.
faster than I was expecting.
So that time frame might be okay. And I should also mention, I don't want to speak for Brian Dudley, but Brian Dudley's been very involved in this study. He sat with us and helped us design it. So I think I can say he's on board with the idea of the study. He's not going to endorse one of these technologies yet, but he thinks they're worth studying. Okay. So the second one, and I apologize for the poor quality slides, the best one I could find right now, but this is George Hoyfelder's system, the so-called layer cake. And this is a non-proprietary system. And essentially what it is there's your septic tank, pump chamber, your leach field, and what he's doing here is putting essentially a wood chip layer underneath the system. He's actually using a sawdust, sand, or silt mix underneath the system. He's also revised this now with this. He's also adding a subsurface retaining basin. So before the water leaches all the way down, it sits in this for a while and then discharges further downstream. And he feels he's getting even more enhancement from that. So there's actually kind of there's a layer cake A and a layer cake B being researched right now. And that again is getting somewhere between 80, 85, in some cases 90% removals. The data looks very good.
So is this one also going to be installed as part of the pilot?
Yes.
Okay, because the other one's proprietary and this one's not proprietary.
Correct.
which means
Both are
it's
going to be
cheaper
installed. That's absolutely right. Yep. And then the third one is a system that has been installed in 2 places on Cape Cod. It's a system called Nitrix. It's actually quite similar to the first one I showed you in that it has a concrete chamber filled with wood chips. Wood chips seems to be the new magic in nitrogen removal. And there's also a nitrifying filter up front. So it's very similar to John Smith's Nitro System. The difference is there are 2 of these installed. One is in Eastham. There's a project called Bracket Landing, if you want to, not too far away, which is, I believe, is an affordable housing project. And there was a nitric system installed there. And then this one was in Mashpee. This is also a subdivision of about 12 homes. This one's been in the ground for almost 10 years. So we got a fair amount of test data. And this is running around 2 milligrams, 3 milligrams per liter effluent, which is better than the wastewater treatment plant in Hyannis and probably better than the one in Provincetown. So that's pretty impressive. So this is the third system that is considered for testing. They may only select 2 of these, and my guess is it would be the first 2, based upon the work that's been done so far. But I wanted to just show you, these are 3 systems that are on the market and actually can be put in today, as long as the difference is to use them today, you have to file under pilot or provisional status, in which case you need a permit from the Board of Health and Wellfleet and a permit from DEP, and it's done on a case-by-case basis. So if there was a business or homeowner that wanted to try this in Wellfleet, it's available to be put in. It's just that it can't be used for general use without DEP's review, et cetera, et cetera. So those are 3 technologies that I think are worth considering, and I'm putting them in the planning process here just under what we're calling enhanced INA to be distinguished from existing INAs, which I don't believe really provide enough benefit on a cost basis to really make it worthwhile. Although it's probably almost, based upon some of the studies we've done in other areas, the existing INAs are pretty similar cost to centralized sewering. It's almost a break even. So if the town decided we want to use the existing INAs and we just don't want a sewer collection system, you might be able to accomplish it. Using these existing INAs, it would just be a lot more expensive, I think, than some of these newer technologies that appear to be much more efficient. Okay? So enhanced INAs is what I'm going to talk about as a new version of the INAs that people are working very hard on, and I can keep you appraised of the progress of that study.
I'd appreciate
What's the
that.
cost?
The cost?
Like, so like, instead of like putting in a standard Title V system, which
The numbers that I'm hearing, and there is, I can provide the town report done by EPA on exactly that detailed cost analysis, but the range is on the order of $15,000 to $25,000 per system.
So what would that be as a percentage of additional cost?
It's roughly double. Correct.
From an existing system. Well, the other thing is, they're different ones, so let me just go back
Depends what
here.
the base.
Are you saying that the 15 to 25 is for the regular INAs or for these?
For these.
Okay.
So the interesting thing is for this one, it might be possible to go into a property that already has a functioning septic tank and leach field, functioning, and
Yeah,
basically
retrofit.
put this in the middle. In which case, that will be a lot less expensive because, as you probably know, the expensive part of this is the leach field, building that thing. So if you can use existing leach field, which you might be able to do, then that price would go way down here. Georgia's system is a new leach field, so there's no way around it. So that one's maybe a little more expensive, although if this one needs a new leach field, then, see, there's a lot of site consideration. That's why it's hesitant.
I'm just saying, new
prices.
construction, you walk in there,
The difference.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're gonna either put in a standard Title V that costs somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, and now you're putting in something that's gonna cost $25,000.
Yeah. So the difference is the additional cost for the nitrogen.
So it's 2 to 2.5 times.
Yeah. That's right. But again, if you compare that with
So
sewer
if
costs,
okay, so is there any kind of assistance that the state of Massachusetts, federal government, town of Wellfleet wants to do?
so there is the possibility of using the state revolving fund, SRF funds, that are conventionally used for wastewater. The word on the street now is that can now be used for these alternative systems. But the trick with this would be, what's the town's involvement? Who's maintaining these systems? Is the town going to get involved in this? And is it part of a town project or is it individual projects?
No, for any of these to be successful, they need to be monitored. So
They need to be
have-
maintained
yep.
and monitored, right?
There has to be a routine maintenance cycle, otherwise.
That's right.
So just
Yeah.
off the top of my head, so like say we said, okay guys, if you want to build a new house, town's gonna come in, we're gonna pay for the extra cost and we're gonna monitor it,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get that money through the revolving fund. Town's still gonna have to pay back,
Yes.
but like if you did the whole, I'm just doing the economic analysis in my mind on this, right? Rather, it's either $50 million to buy a new
Yeah.
sewage, standard sewage treatment plant and piping and all the rest of that crap,
Right.
which has huge maintenance costs over it, or kind of onesies and twosies as they go along.
Yeah.
And then as people, add on to their houses, their septic systems.
Well, that's the way that this.
Yeah.
The way that
So
this,
like, it's economically, an economic model for that. It's a better economic model for the town.
if you were going to go this direction, the most efficient way to do this economically is, as you said, new construction or when a system gets inspected during a real estate transfer, it doesn't meet it, you gotta dig it up, that's when you do it, right? Because you're gonna spend the money anyways. So the marginal cost is much less. And it is possible for the town to be a participant in that, exactly as you said.
Because otherwise they're gonna be forced, to build a
Exactly.
$50 million
Exactly.
system.
So this is an interesting idea that I think with the new technologies makes it even more interesting. Okay, and that's why I wanted to throw it out here.
What's the difference in the cost between not Scott, George's system and the proprietary systems?
I think again it depends on the site, but generally speaking, George is talking about something like what George says is if you build all of that anyways, his additional cost is really this.
Yep.
And this, because this does have to be a pump system, a dose system. So the whole thing here might be 35 grand, but this might be 4 grand or 5 grand. This might be 3 or 4 or 5 grand. I don't know. So in other words, it's a component of it. And so the cost depends what you mean. Whether you're talking about for new construction, you're putting in this whole thing. What's the cost? Maybe 35,000. If you're putting it in as if you're building one of these as an upgrade, that would just be the leach field and the silt layer. So it really depends on, and the marginal cost over Title V is the other, I think, figure to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah.
about compared to the nitric system or the Nitro system. What is the comparative cost?
Like I said, they all come in within the range of like 15 to 25, and that depends on a lot of site-specific things.
Okay, even though this one's non-proprietary.
Yeah, I think so, because again, the higher price would be the whole system, which you got to build anyway. So I don't know what a standard Title V system is going for in Wellfleet these days.
Depends on the size of the house.
$5,000 to $10,000.
Yeah. Okay. So say 10,000. Add that.
No.
You're up to 15.
Depends on the size.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, question. The thing that Fred touched on in passing is the biggest difference here is that you are not piping large amounts of sewage long distances, because
Right.
all those pipes, somewhere along the line, start failing
Yeah.
the joints.
Yeah.
Typically, you're supposed to change them every 30
Yeah,
years,
yeah.
but often it happens earlier. And my
Right.
concern for years has been, when one of those joints fails, that has not been cited at a place that's been vetted for clearance from groundwater, distance from the watershed, where the watershed goes into surface water, and also that is the biggest expense in the future.
The piping the system.
Yes,
Yeah.
and repairing it, I'm taking the long vision, so
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
good. So I have a follow-up question. Would these kinds of enhanced systems be usable for small cluster systems?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Perfect. In fact, the two installations of this system on Cape Cod are both clusters. One is in Brackett Landing in Acetown. I don't remember how many units. Somebody guesses say 15, 20, 25 homes on one system.
Yeah.
The one in Mashpee is about 12 or 15 homes. And the more I look at Wellfleet downtown, I mean, my sense is some lots are barely can meet Title V for expansion, some no way, right? So there may be places where you can accommodate more in one area and go to a cluster system.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
So normal septic systems, whether they're cesspools
Yeah.
or have leach fields, depend on the biomat functioning.
Right.
One of our greatest problems is there are a lot of units.
Seasonal. Yeah.
So, do you have any information about how these 3 enhanced systems, I mean, I can call George and ask him,
Yeah.
but, you're here, we're here.
Yeah.
How they do with, how does their biomat function?
Well, it's a great question.
Is it always an issue?
So I actually asked Brian Baumgarten about it, about the same question, and specifically in regards to these systems. And they've been testing that. My understanding is that they've been testing that at the septic test center, and all indications show that within like a day or two of flow resumption that they perform. Yep. So
Really?
it's very quick.
Yeah, the recovery seems to be pretty quick. Yeah, so it's not a huge problem, but there is some data on that. The other interesting, when you look at George's, or the county health department's data on all the INA systems on Cape Cod, one thing you'll see is highly variable in terms of the treatment removal, and the EPA study that looked at that, they went through the data in detail, is really not so much on how the system's performing, but what the strength of the original wastewater is. Because in those studies, they assume an inflow of 35 milligrams per liter, but in fact, some homes have a much higher flow and load, so it really depends on the individual home. And the study sort of ended up concluding you need to look at these systems in aggregate and look at an average rate, because that's what Wellfleet Harbor is going to see if you put in a bunch of these. Wellfleet Harbor is not going to see that one system that's performing super well. It's going to perform the average, and part of that is the seasonality. George has had some reduced nitrogen levels in some systems put in Falmouth during the winter months, just because of the cold. The bugs don't work as well in the winter, but it's a fairly minimal change. But the intent of the study is to average all that and find out in a composite how these perform, and the outlook is pretty good.
Are any of the pilot sites either currently or being proposed, do any of them have high salinity waters?
High salinity waters.
Yes.
Groundwater?
Yep.
I don't think so, no.
Because all of my reading says that these types of systems with wood chips, the wood chips degrade much faster in a saline environment.
In a saline environment? Yeah.
And it might be a consideration.
Okay. Yes.
Just a quick note on the cost. In my home, I have a 5-bedroom septic, Title V. It was put in shortly before I bought the property, and I'm told it was around a $25,000 job. So that estimate sounded a little low to me.
It's variable. I hear numbers. That's why I hesitate to answer those questions, because I've heard a pretty broad range, and I believe everybody that tells me. So.
Depends on the number of bedrooms, the soil
Yeah.
structure, and a variety of
Yeah.
other considerations. So,
Yeah, I've asked a number of contractors, and they said on average it's around 8 to 9. So.
Well, let's keep going. So another option that was considered in the 208 plan, I'm not sure it has a place here or not, but is even something more close to the source, urine diversion systems, separating urine from feces, and then collecting that and either treating that or reusing that. One thing we looked at was where there might be existing urinals. And I don't know how many there are downtown in Wellfleet. There are some, probably along the restaurants, the town hall, et cetera, et cetera. The nice thing about those is the plumbing is pretty much, at least 50% of the plumbing is done, the men's rooms. So these tend to be places, if you're going to use this kind of system, can be pretty cost efficient. As the slide says, about 90% of the nitrogen in wastewater is in the urine. So if you can collect that, and it's a relatively small volume compared to wastewater flows. And in Vermont, they're sanitizing and using it as a fertilizer in the hay fields in Vermont successfully under a state permit and an EPA study. So I just mentioned it because it's an interesting, very alternative approach, but very cost effective according to some of the studies that have been done. There are some challenges with this. The biggest challenge probably is just acceptance by homeowners. So I'm not going to spend much time on that, but I wanted to put it in there because it is on the list. And if I think about trying to come up with something, we get the source controls downtown. I think it's the enhanced INAs are the most likely benefits, or maybe something like this if you wanted to go that direction. It is also possible to manufacture fertilizer from that collected urine. It's called struvite, and then the public perception should kind of go away because it looks like regular fertilizer. You can put it on a golf course, put it on a lawn, put it on a cemetery, many of which are fertilized, I find out, across Cape Cod, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an option. So the second category I want to talk about, which I really think has some interesting application here, are these permeable reactive barriers. I suspect many of you have heard about these, but I'll just quickly review. The concept is to put a reactive wall, a vertical wall, down gradient from septic systems and intercept the groundwater as it flows through. Much like the technologies we were talking about, the design of these really has been focused on wood chip media again. As the reactive media, a mix of wood chips, sand, wood chips and sawdust, etc. Now, as the slide suggests, the limitation of this method, trench method is that you can only get down around 40 feet from grade. The equipment to dig a trench, which is about 4 to 6 feet wide, the current technology is to go down around 40 feet. And then you dig a linear wall and intercept the groundwater heading towards the harbor.
So it's kind of like a slurry wall.
Yeah, now these have been used extensively around the world for groundwater cleanup projects. Big gasoline spill, oil spill, they surround it, they build a wall, and the removal rates are very high. And we've talked to many of those engineers who've done those projects, and that suggests that, again, the removal rates here are 90% plus. And many of you have heard there is well actually before I get there, let me show you the other technology. Notice with this slide, that one of the issues here is this is 40 feet. If we're 10 feet to groundwater, that means we have 30 feet saturated thickness here. As you probably know, the aquifer under Wellfleet is probably on the order of 100 feet or more in many places, so there's the possibility of underflow there. You're not going to get all of it. USGS and EPA are partnering on some studies around the Cape right now to figure out how deep the nitrogen typically goes, and as you might suspect, it's variable. So that would be the first step to employ this technology to find out where is the nitrogen in the groundwater heading towards, let's say, Duck Creek. So the other technology, and this is the one they're using in Orleans, which is what I wanted to get to. The good news is there's a pilot study ongoing pretty close by. We've got some great data, which is why I've been more seriously looking at it here. And instead of a trench, this is a series of injection wells. And you pump, in this case, a fluid that's actually like a vegetable oil. It has an emulsifier in it. And that is a carbon-based product that does the same thing as the wood chips. Once it goes down the well, it squeezes out of the well. These are well screens. Instead of water going in, the solution goes out, and you create a barrier, essentially oil that adheres to the sand grains around the well. Based upon the project in Orleans, it looks like you'd need a well every 10 feet. So if you can picture along a road that might be intercepting groundwater or underneath a road, you need a well every 10 feet. And then you inject this material, and again, one of the questions is how long does it last? And we don't know, we haven't done it long enough, but based upon the data we've got so far, somewhere between 7 and 25 years is the range that people are looking at. We need to go back and re-inject. Not necessarily put in new wells, but re-inject. So that's another possibility.
Scott, just a question on that. So is that effectively making a biomat?
It
every
is.
10 feet?
It is. Sure, it's providing
So
biomass with a carbon source.
So
Right.
in terms of safety or concerns about the leachate coming out of something like that?
In Orleans, they have monitoring wells up and down gradient, and they're monitoring obviously for the nitrogen removal, which they're getting around 90%. But the other thing they're monitoring for is any of this emulsified oil moving, and so far they haven't found anything. And again, there have been studies with that. They've also looked at that and not found it. So it looks like that's not an issue.
Are they using a pH fixing agent?
Are they using a what?
A pH fixing agent?
I don't know. I'm not sure. whether they do or
Because all PRBs result in acidic downflow
Right.
waters,
Right.
which could be a concern.
Yeah.
I mean, the water on Cape Cod is naturally
You're
acidic
right, it is,
anyways.
exactly. What they did find, I'll show you, I have a picture of it in here. Yeah, this is the PRB that was installed at McCoy Bay. Some of you may have heard about this project. It was a joint effort between actually Nitrix company, the same company that designed the septic system, and the Marine Biological Laboratory. They put in a trench method right here. Now I'm colorblind, so I can't see the slide that well, but I'm told that it looks green here and reddish here.
Yeah.
Okay, I checked that again tonight to make sure the slide is going to work, because I can't see it. And they've obviously been monitoring this one, and again, they've been getting 80–90% plus removal. So this is the trench method, small scale, McCoy, and that's been there for at least 15 years. And it's been working quite well. And we've been talking to Ken Foreman, who is one of the designers of that system, from MBL. So that's the trench method. The one in Orleans is the injection well method. So the nice thing is we have 2 case studies on Cape Cod. And it may be that Wellfleet might want to try a pilot of one of these. In fact, I did some looking around. Now this is back to, this is Duck Creek here. and the downtown area orientation with six. And this is the watershed, sub-watershed to Duck Creek, okay? And these dots represent individual homes. Cape Cod Commission has a tool called Watershed MVP. What they've done is they've collected water use data. Now in Wellfleet that's been a challenge because only a small part of the town has public water. But what they've done is collected water use data where it exists, or they estimate the water use and wastewater generation using other methods, and then they project a nitrogen load at each location, okay? So this part of the downtown area looks like it's the highest density. So this road, Commercial Street, might be, and one of the things we look for when we put in PRBs, by the way, is a linear access area that the town can get into, and often that is known as a road or a road layout because the town typically has access there. So one possibility would be to put a PRB along Commercial Street and have it intercept the groundwater going towards Duck Creek. And what I did is went out and looked around a little bit as a close-up. I don't remember the name of this road.
Bank Street.
Bank Street?
Yep.
Bank Street. So I went down there and took that picture. This is a town-owned parcel. This is, I think, owned by the Yacht Club. The who?
Sonic Lodge.
Okay. Okay, not the Yacht Club. Okay. And so this might be a place where the town have access to try a very small-scale PRB pilot project. Back to DEP, what they want to see is steps forward, action. A plan and some action to try things. So putting in one idea that we can talk more about is putting in a real small-scale PRB here. If you can picture one well every 10 feet, maybe there's 10 wells there, injection wells.
The trench method seemed to be longer lasting, according to...
Longer lasting.
Because you said the example that they had has been in place for 15 years.
Yeah.
And
still working,
and
right.
from the ejection
Yeah.
sites, it looks to be 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So does that mean that over the long term, the trench methods might be more economical, even though they might not be able to go as far?
I don't think we know the answer to that yet, because remember that when we did the cost analysis as part of 208, because we tried to assign cost to each one of these, we had to assume a replacement cost. With the injection wells, you're just injecting fluid every 7, 15, 20 years. With the trench, you're digging a new trench.
Back up.
So the replacement cost, even though the frequency may be longer, is much higher. And the other problem with trench method is, remember, if you're going down a whole street, you've got utilities. So you got your electric, water, all those costs, in addition to digging the trench, which gets complicated. Can be done, but just another hurdle. Yes?
So you can put a septic system under pavement.
Yes. Yes, you can.
Could you put a trench under pavement?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. If you use the trench or injection wells or either.
Well, the thing about that particular area isn't as hard hit as a little bit farther east.
Hard hit from a...
Lots of septic
Okay,
going in.
okay. We're right here. You're
Yeah.
talking further over here?
Yeah, well, oh yeah, except the worst is what's right on Doug.
It looks like this is the high concentration, which is probably flowing like that, which is why I thought this... I just started looking around just for discussion purposes. For the videotape, I am not proposing this. I'm just throwing out as something to think about. I'm looking for ideas that we could put into the plan.
Yeah,
So-
and the other idea is down, if you go back to the other map.
Yep.
Another possibility would be down at the corner. Keep going
Down
down
here.
the pier, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the nice thing about the technology is if it works, as well as it's working in Orleans, and installation, I mean, you could literally go all the way down here
Yeah.
and take care of a pretty big problem.
How far does the injected oil spread from the,
Well, it looks like, according to Orleans, they need a well every 10 feet, so I'm going to assume it's about 5 feet, because each well goes out about 5 feet, and then they need another well.
Could you put it under a road?
You could, and in fact, the injection, I should mention, there's two options. You can put a well in, and then you could flush mount that with a metal cap, much like you see all over on the road, no problem, or on the side of the road. Or what they did in New Orleans is they did not leave a well. They used a probe that went down, injected the material, and then pulled the probe back. So nothing is left. And the plan is for maintenance is they come back and do that again. So there's two options there.
Okay. The other question I have is those cluster systems?
Cluster septics?
Yeah, the cluster systems, you could put those under a road too.
Under a parking lot, I'm not sure I've heard of one. You mean under a town road?
Yes. I talked to the alternatives testing center and they said it would be feasible to put them under a right of way.
Under a right of way, but not the road, not the paved road.
No, they said pavement would be fine.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. I've never seen one proposed
It would
under
be more
a town
expensive,
road.
obviously, but,
Yeah. I mean, one, you can put a manhole there for access for pumping. So-
or off to the side.
Yep. Possible. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking like, you know, there is no space in Wellfleet for all these little, you know, you said it very well. There's a lot of houses down in the main part of town that either have no room for a Title V septic or not really no room. So the really only place that you got lots and lots of room is under the roads.
Yeah.
And if you did cluster systems for like every 12 houses in the middle, in the roads and the town-owned parking lots, wherever, and it has that much removal.
Well, this probably is less expensive, more flexible, and
Well, I mean, like this,
you can accomplish the same, you may be able to accomplish the same thing.
I'm saying maybe it's a combination of the two, but my point being is that, you know, these are things that you can do over time.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
have an economic
Yes.
plan so that
Yeah.
you're not crushing the town with, hey, $50 million, guys, you know, let's pay for that. Like, you know, or you just simply say, okay, we're going to put so many in this year, so many there next year, so many in 10
I
years.
mean, one thing that might be useful, and I don't know if it's been done, I haven't seen it, if a survey, a pretty detailed survey of the downtown area, I mean, you know, this area right here, let's say, forget about lot lines for a second. Just, are there any areas that could function for cluster systems? And how many are there? Has that been done?
Yeah, I looked into this with a health agent back in the early 2000s. The thing about the trench that excites me is this. It's very different than a treatment center. And let's go back to, you don't have to go back to it, but the slide, you don't have to go back to it, but the slide
okay.
that showed the trench and its direct effect on that shoreline, the algae.
Oh, this one here. Yeah.
So let's say, one of the things she and I talked about for a treatment system, which wasn't a good place for it, is Baker Field. However, you could have a humongous trench or an array of them, and you could pipe down, you could have what's
Over
going
here
from
somewhere?
town.
Yeah.
No, down the hill,
Yep.
okay? Which would be a kind of large area to feed into it, but
Yeah.
if it's that effective and you have that many trenches, that would work, because a treatment center there was not going to work.
Okay.
But
Right.
this is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing with, just to go back to small scale cluster systems.
Yeah.
If the discharge is under 10,000 gallons, then we don't need a groundwater discharge for the
Correct.
permit for
Yep.
those systems. So it's a lower permitting threshold.
So that'll be about 30 homes.
Yeah, or
That's what it works out to on average, about 30 homes for each system. So if you had 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 potential sites that could service 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 homes, might be something to consider, cost effective. But that's why if anybody's done a survey, first thing I would do is get rid of the lot lines, because lot lines usually, all right, setbacks, all that. Well, if we have the right deal with the property owners, they'll change the lot lines, or you could, have to change the lot lines, excuse me. You can have a system already, just a Title V system across 2 properties, it's not a problem. So forget about the lot lines first cut, just look for, are there sites that could work?
In Duxbury, back in the early 2000s, they did a very successful cluster system right around their
Yeah,
marina area. because they were in trouble.
Yep.
It would be good to know what that plan looks like.
Duxbury, yeah.
Yeah, in other words, how far away did they take it? And then they did another one a little later in a kind of normal kind of development situation.
Okay. Let me keep going here. We've got a few more
I just have
slides.
one
These are
quick
great.
question.
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
when you're presenting these alternatives, for example, if you look at the Bank Street parking lot,
That
yeah,
one.
so would you look at a combination, like Freddie was saying, a combination of maybe having a trench along there somehow, but could that also be appropriate for one of these enhanced INA cluster
You
systems?
still got to get your 4 feet to high groundwater,
Okay,
and with a 10-foot tide,
yeah, you will get it.
I've actually witnessed test pits out there several times with that exact location, watching the tide come up, showing
Yeah.
people that yes, the groundwater does come up with the
Okay.
tide. I don't think you'll meet it there.
Right, so it'd have to be somewhere farther away from the
Yeah,
water.
that's the problem. As we get down low,
Mm-hmm,
you're not going to meet the separation. Throw a little sea level rise in there, and
right.
you're really in trouble.
So,
But you are looking for we are looking for a combination of all of these different types of.
Yeah, yeah.
Not just, it's not like we're just gonna go with one, we might do
the
some
nice
trenches
thing-
here and some
Yes,
enhanced
that's
INAs
right.
there, cluster systems.
I should have mentioned before, one of the intents, again, some of this comes from 208 approach, is a hybrid approach. Don't think of one technology solving your problem. That's why I'm laying out 4 tonight. There's actually 30, but I'm trying to give you 4 that I think have the best likelihood based upon my studies so far. But the other comment I want to make about depth of groundwater, the fact that it's shallow here is actually good for a PRB, because you don't have to go far to get there.
kind of to go to sea level rise, that was touched on briefly, is that I think for a lot of these low-lying properties, we have to start thinking about how to get their septic treatment fields above the floodplain, or above, where the water is going to be in a few years, because all indications are is that it's rising.
Yep, sure.
And, we need to be able to harden the infrastructure that supports the town and the harbor as a whole.
One of the exciting things to me, though, is that, as Scott's been working very hard to get a toolkit of a lot of different options, because they all have site specificity around them. And, you have a wrench, you have a hammer, you have a set of pliers, and each one can be applied in different situations, which is what's great about having a variety of them.
Yeah. I'll let you keep going here. So the other one worth mentioning is stormwater, which is one of the approved methods. In fact, the DEP is willing to give you a 25% credit up front just by saying, we'll do it. But then they're going to monitor you to make you do it. What's that?
So we already did it on commercial,
Yep.
so the question there would be, to what extent can we get credit, since the...
Well, that's what you need to ultimately do is have a compendium of all of your projects and show what's been done.
What is the stormwater outflow on commercial?
It's being collected and then it just goes through soil.
Okay.
So just as a quick
Is
example.
the stormwater treated at all with like a PRB or anything like that?
No, there's no treatment there.
So that
But it
would
may-
provide minimal gains to overall nutrient loading, because it's going straight to the groundwater. And once it's in the groundwater, there's no denitrification until it gets to
Right.
the embayment itself.
Right.
According to MEP, about 10% of the nitrogen load overall in Wellfleet Harbor system is stormwater. That probably varies by sub-embayment, and where you've got, Route 6 is a big contributor for sure. So there may be some target areas where the town can get some credit for projects, like even including ones that have already been done. But just as an example, at Barnstable, we identified this project down in Katuitt. This is a road leading down to the bay. You can see the stormwater line coming in. It's a linear project by retention area that ended up looking like this in a parking lot right next to the harbor. And this system is, preliminary results showing, again, very high levels of nitrogen removal. Same principles. If you can have a vibrant root zone associated with a planted treatment system like this, possibly even add wood chips into the matrix, you're going to get good removal of nitrogen. So that's another component. It's not a huge one. Again, it's not going to solve the whole problem, but if we chip away at it with multiple technologies, I think we can get there. Yeah.
So I've been thinking about stormwater, and one thing that Wellfleet has a lot of is private roads.
Yep.
And how, are there any projects that work around, private roads that have been done on the Cape for stormwater management?
I believe there have been. I'd have to think about identifying them, but I'm pretty sure I've heard of that. I mean, certainly as part of new development projects, the town's required to be put in at the beginning.
Yeah.
Much more treatment now than 10 years ago. So certainly newer development projects have required that, and there probably have been some retrofits too, but I have to think about it.
Yeah, most of the private roads are permeable, so the bigger issue to me would be, you know, where's that stormwater going? Because it's going into the ground, and then ultimately, how's it getting into the watershed?
Yeah, but if you channelize it into like a wood chip system, then you're removing the
Yeah, you'd
nutrients
need-
out of it. And
where-
the roadshed. flood.
Yeah, where Scott's got the, you know, the maps with the lots of green dots on it, those create the right interception points both for stormwater and for groundwater from septics, because you've got both this, that's where the water's flowing anyway. So you know, in those particular instances, whether it's a trench or whether it's an injection system or something like that, that may be appropriate, more appropriate for treating the
Yeah.
stormwater, because on private roads, I can't even imagine with the, you know, the permeable roads, what you could do. And also, you'd have to have some substantial sources to justify a large capital investment. You know, in other words, what I'm anxious to also look at here is, you know, ultimately what's the dollars per pound of nitrogen removed for any given particular approach.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, the nice thing, the only thing I wanted to mention here because of this slide, I took this picture, I think the first storm after the system was installed. You can see the oil coming off the parking lot. So the other big advantage of installing these systems is not just nitrogen, but
Yeah, you remove the
metals and hydrocarbons, etc. And these systems seem to do a pretty good job of that. I don't know, is Wellfleet in the MS4 program, EPA's MS4 stormwater program? I can't
No.
remember. They're not. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. But nonetheless, it's a multi-benefit from doing this. And these systems can look really good. When we put this thing in, people use this parking lot, were just they thought it was great.
Has the state retrofitted anywhere?
Oh yeah, State DOT has a pretty aggressive program putting in retrofit stormwater projects all across the state. They did some work on Route 6 the last couple of years, not here, but Mid-Cape.
Yeah.
I don't know what they've done down here, so.
I don't think they've done anything.
But that's something that, you know, the state's pushing the town to do this, so we should get the state to do some of the work on the state roads as well. And that's, so in my opinion, that should be part of the plan.
right.
It's not a huge amount of credit, but it's something.
Yeah.
Might be 5%. That's
So
okay.
the state would pay for it rather than the
Yeah,
town as well.
absolutely, absolutely. Two more technologies. You guys are familiar with this one, so I don't need to say a lot here. I think this always has been part of the discussion here and continues to be. The amount, I think, is certainly, the volume, how much the town relies on this is up for grabs. And my sense, talking from the DEP, they don't want to see over-reliance on any one technology. And I'm sure we could spend an hour talking about this right now, and my suggestion we don't, because we can, but you guys have had those discussions. There's a lot of components to this. There's issues on the market, there's ups and downs with the production, so there's a lot of variables with this, but nonetheless, my view with this, looking at Wellfleet, is you are doing a lot of shellfish, and I thank you for the landings data, that's very helpful, and you ought to get credit for it. If you want to increase it somewhat, get credit for that. I don't know how much you want to increase it, that's up to you. And ultimately that have to be part of the decision, but it is a serious component that everybody's agreed now it does work. Although I put this slide in because this is another long discussion, but I'll try to boil it down simply. Regardless of how long we want to talk about it, here's DEP's position on this. They're going to give you credit, nitrogen credit, for removal of the organisms, nitrogen content for each oyster or cohog or whatever it is. They're not going to give you upfront credit for the additional denitrification that happens within the ecosystem, but we all know what happens. So if you do this, you install it, and the water starts getting cleaner and you can measure it, then you get the credit. So it's kind of like a deferred credit of that component of this technology, which is fine, because ultimately, as you'll see in my last slide, all of this has to be proven out by monitoring anyways. So whether or not you get the credit up front, in my mind, it doesn't really matter. If it's going to work, and you're going to know it. If it's not going to work, and you're gonna lose the credit anyway. So the results will be in the monitoring data, but this so-called technology of shellfish is certainly something that the Chesapeake has embraced. Many towns in the Cape have embraced. I know Wellfleet's had a lot of talk about it. Cape Cod Commission's behind it, Mass DEP's accepting of it, EPA's behind it, so it's an accepted technology. And I think the big question for Wellfleet is how much, and that's up to the town to decide. That'll have to be part in terms of what we put in the plan, how much we put in there.
One issue in regards to shellfish, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of all of this, is that when the MEP set the threshold target, that they were already taking out nitrogen out of the system.
Correct.
So whatever the shellfish were taking out at that moment,
Yeah.
we have this snapshot.
Yep.
So whatever the shellfish were taking out at that moment is the baseline.
Yep.
So what we need to look at is the difference from
Yeah.
that baseline.
And it looks like the data for the first 3 or 4 years after that was going up,
Yeah,
but then the
but
most
then-
recent data, it looked like it kind of leveled off or came down.
Yeah, the
So-
problem is the quahog harvest collapsed, and that was because of disease largely.
Right.
And market factors, but
Right,
largely
right.
because of disease.
So again, I think this is certainly part of the plan, but it's not gonna, like everything else we talked about, it's not gonna solve the problem alone. So keep it in the plan. We can talk about, how much more we want to put in future development of the industry as part of this plan, and that's something that the town, we're going to be, we meaning me and the Cape Cod Commission, to be all ears listening to the town to tell us what they think.
I think it would be very hard to increase commercial production of shellfish.
To increase?
Yeah. Because we're basically, the current harvest amounts is basically where it was when the MEP took, when the MEP did their water sampling.
So what you're saying that we cannot increase?
It would be hard to increase. The big thing is the oyster production's been skyrocketing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's boom. But at the same time, just the same, the quahog harvest has been just falling off the edge of the cliff.
That's because when the X came in, it killed all the
It's also math though. When cohogs were only worth 12 cents, you stopped growing those and sold oysters
Yep.
for 50 cents, and now
Yeah.
cohogs are worth 32 cents again.
And maybe people
So
will
that's
start
going to
planning.
start
Yeah, I
switching
wouldn't
back
agree.
over.
I wouldn't
But
agree with no potential for
there's
increase.
definitely potential. It's just that it's so determined on market factors and disease.
But you have 90 plus different businessmen in town who run farms.
Yep.
And no one's gonna tell them what to do with their business plan if they choose to grow more, which a lot of
Yeah,
people
they
are.
can.
They will, so I have that as also, there's bottom out there that is available. I see grants where there is a potential for an increase in aquaculture. And then you also have a propagation program that has been basically non-existent for the past 6 years, or the past 2. We've been trying to play catch up. So also in the wild, we might realize some increase in wild harvest. And for example, we've made investments into cohogs, which a lot of people are collecting, harvesting cohogs and then.
So what happens also when you open up the gate at the dike? Are we going to start to see shellfish propagation up the Yarra River?
Could be, I mean, that's
I don't
pretty
know,
far away down the road.
John there?
but-
Could be.
Could be. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of places where we could increase shellfish. There's another possibility.
And maybe it's incremental, I don't know, it's hard for me as the kind of overseer of shellfish industry in this town to think that it wouldn't increase with, almost 100 different businessmen, and then you have wild pickers, so, I don't know if it's enough of an increase to make a difference. Maybe you're talking more about statistical significance, and maybe we're not gonna get there, but.
I would say definitely if the quahog production can be increased, we'll see gains as long as the oyster production maintains as it is now.
But
I would also say that we should try to figure out some way to get a handle on the wreck harvest.
Question in the back.
We are.
Because it doesn't, I don't think the wreck harvest is as big as it once was, but it definitely could be an area where we could be seeing.
Yeah, that's data that you don't have, but I do have, I have 4 months of data from 2018, and I have some rough data from the entire year of 2019. It's hard for us to monitor the recreational fishery
Yeah.
year-round, with the intensity that we're able to do it in the summer with a dedicated staff person, but that's good data that we could also.
Is there a question in the
I've
back?
been doing this shell fishing for like 75% of my life. Until they dredge the harbor in Wellfleet, there is going to be no increase in shellfish. That mud kills everything. It's the propagation, yes, Nancy, you work hard at it, but any natural scent gets covered by the silt mud and kills it. So, the talk about increasing shellfish and the increase in markets, the markets have been the same for the last 50 years. So, producing more oysters for marketing on cohos, it's senseless because we don't have the markets to make the money. All they're doing is lowering the price. So it's going to be that you're not going to make a living with increased production of oysters.
But we don't have control over that, because I can't tell anybody, oh, you can't grow anymore. So
But the
each businessman
propagation,
is
yes,
gonna
you try it, but it's not going to work. It's a waste of effort unless the town puts out the money to dredge the harbor. We have lost more oyster ground for the wild fishermen because of silt mud than anything else in this town.
Look, let me make a suggestion. I've got 2 more slides, but the reason I preface this discussion is I know this is a huge discussion, and I just want to forecast. My job is to put this plan together. Although Cape Cod Commission's a participant and the town's a participant, and one of the inputs for sure I'm going to be looking for from the town, and I don't know who to look at when I'm saying the town, is this question. What's going to be what would you like to put in the plan? Remember, this is a plan. It's not a commitment. It's not a forecast. It's a plan. So the plan could be the town's going to plan to dredge the harbor, and X could be. The other plan could be we're not going to increase at all because we don't want to ruin the markets.
They haven't dredged this harbor in 40 years.
Right.
They have no intention to.
But
That's not
being
true.
dredged.
Then why isn't it done?
so my only question is I would like to suggest that somebody in the town or figure out how to put together a shellfish component for this, because it's a big variable in the plan. Because depending on how many we put in there, increase, it's a fairly significant number according to nitrogen removal. There's many dimensions to this, which I can't get into. I don't want to get into. I don't
It's
have right
another
to get
tool
into.
in the toolbox.
It's a tool, and so what I need
It's
to hear.
how much we want to use it.
Yeah, and the real trick's going to be if I hear 10 things that go from here to here, what do I put in the plan?
Yeah, got it.
So that's what I need. I need some help with that.
Yeah.
Not tonight, okay? But think about that, because that's an important one. And eventually that's going to be a part of the plan for sure.
And you just heard that there's a lot of different thoughts on it.
Yeah,
right
so
here.
the trick is not any of the questions you raise, it's how do you develop a process to come up with some consensus of a plan? That's the trickiest thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Got it.
No, I think the DEP is also going to want to see controlled amounts.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
need to,
yeah.
It needs to be predictable, and it needs to
Yes.
accomplish
Yes.
this.
Yeah. And it has to be monitored.
Yeah.
I should mention the watershed permit that I mentioned at the beginning, and I'll mention at the end in a minute. People may know there is a watershed permit for Pleasant Bay. It's the first one and the only one in the state, and shellfish is part of it. They have shellfish. They are getting credit for shellfish. They have to monitor it, and if it goes higher, they get more credit. If it goes lower, they get subtracted. So it's just a plan. It's not a commitment. Nobody's going to go to jail if it doesn't happen. The monitoring will prove it out one way or another. So the question is, what do you want to put in the plan? That's the only
Right.
question.
Yeah.
And I don't need to know now.
Yeah, no, my question is that in Orleans, in the
Yeah.
Pleasant Bay one,
Yes.
it was something that they created to go in there, whereas
Correct.
Wellfleet has already.
Right.
And we would look at what we already have
Yes.
to kind of,
It has an increase, right?
yeah.
Yeah, with one caveat, I would say there are areas where I think there's the potential to improve productivity in the wild, and also because of the Herring River project and the dredging project, some bottom that currently is not productive. Back to your point, should become more productive. So we kind of have to look at those things.
All right, let me show you my last two slides. These are great comments and discussion. Learning a lot here. So this is not a great slide for your projects, but one of the tools that I think is definitely appropriate in Wellfleet is what the 208 plan called coastal restoration projects. So this would clearly include Mayo Creek and Herring River. This is just a picture of a culvert widening project in Barnstable. It was done, paid for under a state program by the Division of Ecological Restoration. Many of these programs, most of these programs, in my experience in the state, have been for ecological restoration, not for nitrogen management. And the state has done many of these, and we have almost no data on how the nitrogen benefit has occurred. And I know that because when I did 208, I read all of them, including the Herring River EIR, I might mention, and there's just no information in terms of post-construction, like we're talking about that I know of. And John, I'd be happy. I know you may be the best person to talk to
I
further.
don't know of any data from elsewhere, but I know for Herring River, the USGS has generated some numbers. They measured mass transport of nitrogen in and out of the dike
Yes,
for
yeah.
a long period of time.
The big question is, what's it going to be after the project gets built?
That was supposed to be measured, right?
Right, after it gets built, right?
Yes, after, yeah.
So the comment on this one is, of all the technologies we've talked about, and virtually all of them on the tour, this is the one that is probably the most site-specific and the one that is the hardest to predict on a per acre. We can predict on a per oyster basis because we know what they weigh, we know how much nitrogen they accumulate. We got that, we know that information. These projects, they're all different. The flushing rates change, the amount of salt marsh gets generated, how productive the salt marsh is, how long it takes the salt marsh comes up to steady state. Those are wild
The big
variables.
one is the groundwater discharge location.
What's that?
The big one is, a big factor is the groundwater discharge location, whether it discharges seaward of the marsh through sandy sediments or if it actually flows through
Yes.
either organic sediments.
So my sense is these should be in our plan because the town's active at doing some projects, which are great projects for, if not for nitrogen, certainly for other reasons. But they should be in the plan because most of us believe, and I do too, there will be some nitrogen removal, but I can't give you a number, what it's going to be. So you can put it in the plan as a non-credit thing, but we're going to do it and then we're going to measure it. And over time, then we get the credit. So that's another option. And it's kind of a continuum, if you think of that way. Wastewater treatment plant, DP is going to, if you write a permit for 5 milligrams per liter discharge, they're going to give you the full credit, and the probability of achieving that is like 99% in DP's eyes. This technology, you can throw a number in there, but their perception on the likelihood is probably 5% of probability, how accurate it is. I'm just guessing. I'm just saying it's very low. Doesn't mean it's not going to provide tremendous nitrogen removal. It's just that we don't have the studies or models are convincing enough to prove it at this point. And believe me, I've been trying because I'm a huge proponent of these projects, and I'd love to see some nitrogen data to really back them up post-construction. Muddy Creek and Chatham might be the first one because they're building that and they're going to be monitoring it. But unfortunately, the state's done, 30 or 40 of these projects, and none of them were measured for nitrogen before and after. None. Because I know when I went and asked them, I said, show me the files. We don't have them. We never did it. So, unfortunate.
So given that, to confirm what John said, he knows more than I do, we do have data on what's coming out of Herring River.
Currently, yes.
So my take, having spoken with Brian Dudley just to bring
Yep.
myself up to
Yep.
speed
Yep.
a number of years ago, is they want to see good faith efforts,
Yes, yeah.
and they want to see us not just sitting on our hands.
Correct.
But given that we have this huge project in the making that's very concretely going forward, and given that they're going to be looking at us pretty much in 5-year cycles, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to, after 7 years, for a huge amount of restored area, going to say, now you have to put in a septic system.
Right, right.
Is that, they're not going to commit to that, but is that an accurate climate for their assessment of how you're doing. In other words, that is a big component in this.
Let me go to the last slide. This might answer your question. I'm not sure. So this is also a graphic from the 208 plan, and it used to be labeled adaptive management, and it is, but I just relabeled it as watershed permit framework because this is what DEP took to fold into the Pleasant Bay permit, and I would suspect your permit will look something like this. Generally speaking, it's a 20-year plan. It's going to take longer than that. Barnstable was at 60 years. They just brought it back to 30 years. 20 years is probably overly optimistic, but that's the starting place. And the idea is to put this plan into 5-year increments, because the theory is that's enough time to build a project and monitor it. You need at least 2 years of data to monitor something. 3 is better. You need at least a year or 2 to design, permit, and build something. So 5 years is probably a reasonable time frame if you're committed to getting the project done and move along quickly. So the way this works is, up here are what we're calling the non-traditional technologies. All of the things we talked about tonight, except for the wastewater treatment plant that's down here. That's the conventional, traditional technology. So the plan is to move forward with both. But the good news is, for a town that doesn't have the money or isn't convinced they want to build the sewer, you don't have to build it yet. All you have to do is find a site, convince DEP it will work hydraulically, which is what has to happen now in Wellfleet. Very small part of the cost of, like 0.001% of the cost of building the treatment plant. And then during the 5 years, the idea would be to do some design work on that system. Figure out where the sewers might go. Again, this is soft money, like planning, engineering money, not building anything. But the idea is to have something moving forward so that you'll have something ready to go. And then during that 5-year period, we do, this graphic shows 3 things, but we just talked about, I think, 5 things. Stormwater, oysters, PRB, so there might be 5 of these, whatever you pick. The idea would be to build pilots, do studies on shellfish, track the landings, build a PRB down at Bank Street, put in some INAs, or actually maybe refer to the Barnstable study here, and say during that 5 years we'll get information on that, and look at a plan, maybe search for cluster sites in town during this period of time. And then at the end of 5 years, look at the data. Where are we at? And if some things are working well, then you move ahead with more. So if the PRB works great at Bank Street, then you start building it out other places. If something works pretty good, but it didn't work as well as we hoped, maybe we can fix it. Maybe we can modify it and continue on. Maybe some of the technologies that we want to try just aren't working for one reason or another. Get rid of them. Abandon them. See where we're at cumulatively. And by the way, at that time we're still monitoring water quality, which the town's doing. So you're seeing what's going on in the bay, in the harbor. And at a 5-year increment, have a decision point where the town sits down with DEP and others and say, where are we at here? And if this is going well enough, this can be postponed further. And that happens in 5-year increments. That's what DEP will accept as a watershed permit. They want to see this. They want to see this first phase, and we can detail how much of that would be during the 5 years. For the permit, to get the permit, which is what I'm working on, you don't have to do any detailed design. You just have to prove out the site having the capacity to accept the wastewater, which I think we're on the 3-yard line. I mean, everything else looks like the site's going to work. Just got to put some holes in there and test the water. I'm talking about the transfer station site.
You can test the permeability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the glacial geology shows that it's going to work. All the neighboring perk tests look good. It all looks good, but you got to put the test pits in there. Yeah.
I have a question. How large an area are we expecting the transfer station site to serve? And what I'm having in mind are the housing stocks around places like Gull Pond, where it would really be difficult to install sewer lines.
Yeah.
Sewer lines.
The Cape Cod Commission has done, well, there's actually a few different plans. Environmental Partners did a plan, but they did that before the MEP study. So that plan doesn't tie to the removal rates. Cape Cod Commission has done a couple of different layouts of potential sewering areas that would make up the required MEP reductions. And we can look at those maps. We showed them at a prior meeting, and they have those. And basically, it's the downtown area for sure, but it's also down in the southern part of town, Blackfish Creek area, because that needs some. And one plan that probably would never happen, I don't think, but get it in a plan to show that it could happen, is pump that stuff north to the treatment plant. The other option would be to find a satellite site out there, but if you say that, then we got to find the satellite site now and test it. Or you can say we're going to put it all at the plant now, and then later you have every right to say, nope, we decided we're going to put it over here instead, and then you don't spend the money to test the other site. Your option, you can spend the money now and test 2 sites, or test 1, say it's all going to go there with the option of changing it later.
So a couple things.
Actually, these guys have questions too.
Okay, but where was I? In some of those sub-watersheds, the Plan B might be, based on pre-existing technology, the Plan B could be IA systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would, be incorporated as part of the Plan B, which might involve less hard engineering than a fully sewered township.
Yeah.
But you gotta start the engineering on the
Yes.
on the traditional system.
And
You gotta show that you gotta pretend that you're gonna actually build this thing while you kind of go, let's try all these other things in the meantime.
Well, the other thing that's critically important too is that, in moving a sewer option along, as we get through and start to do, design work on it, we're going to get a better cost estimate. And we really need to be looking at what the cost of that is compared to whatever else we're pursuing. I mean, obviously we have to be doing a least cost approach and looking at all of the options, together with that in mind. I mean, it's really about protecting the taxpayer's interest.
Did we ever do any hotspot testing of the abatement areas? In other words, you just okay, there's the nitrogen in this area is way high, the nitrogen in this area is not, so therefore we can make the assumption that
from when they put the water system in the center of town, they identified a number of areas that had high nitrogen or high nitrate levels.
In well water, yeah.
Yeah. And that could be used as a proxy for determining where the nitrogen is most concentrated. I do have a concern about.
but it's really the abatement areas that we're concerned with.
Yes, overall, and the harbor as a whole.
Yeah.
But I do have a concern, and that is if the town moves too slowly. If we do a number of small pilot projects that don't necessarily make a dent, all indications show that the water quality is decreasing very rapidly, and that we should be more aggressive than passive. And to get ahead of the problem so we don't have a real problem. Right now it's so I would just say that I'd be hesitant. I'm all for pilot projects and everything, but I'm really hesitant to only do a number of small scale studies and then wait 5 to 10 years and then realize or have something really bad happen out there, which is
But I think the challenge that we have as a committee and, in terms of our relationship with the community is to begin to have more discussions like we're having tonight with these different technologies, and also see and hear how people react to different ideas and different concepts. Collectively we've got a problem, and we've got to figure out collectively what our solution is going to be. And even though different people sitting in the room may have different pet, technologies, at the end of the day, we're going to have to get a consensus set of alternatives. And that, I think, is our biggest challenge. And so, from a timescale standpoint, if we're talking about going to town meeting with a warrant article, it's got to be pretty specific. And we obviously are not even close to being prepared or could think about doing something like that for this April. So if you start thinking about how that gets sequenced, whether it's next April or the following April, those are the realistic stop points at which we might consider having something that's been vetted and been talked about thoroughly within the community to start to look at getting funding for it. So
The other question
Yeah,
is,
yeah, there's,
Questions back here?
yeah.
Go,
Me?
no, yeah.
go ahead, yeah.
So truly, given that the groundwater moves slowly west, when you were having the conversation with the DEP and the Cape Cod Commission the week before last or previous to that, did nobody say, this is all going to go into the Herring River if it's sited at the transfer station? Did nobody bring that up? Because that is my,
No, we
there's
didn't,
area,
not really.
there's a certain distance from
Yeah.
groundwater, but really I think that you'd have to have a real heavy-duty treatment plant there, which
Yeah.
is very expensive. You couldn't just leach it.
no,
Well, you're getting-
you're getting a treatment before you leach it.
Yes, but it would have to be a lot of
Well,
treatment.
the other problem with that site,
When you say a lot of treatment, I mean, standard treatment plants, I mean, from the engineering point of view,
I know. And they do something, but that is going to be, if that was an alternative, which I hope we
Yeah.
never get to,
Yeah.
that would be, Fred, forgive me, I really do know, I've read about it, so,
okay.
yeah, I do.
That
But
is
the
in,
point is,
that
it's
is
going to
in,
be forever.
yeah, that is in Brian
That's a
Dudley's
problem.
letter. That is part of the scope.
Oh,
It needs to be,
really?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've done
We
it-
talked about it at that meeting.
He did.
Yeah.
And it's in the letter as well. And it's
Are we
also,
going to have a report on that meeting or some kind of memorandum that we could all read, particularly other people?
there is the letter that he sent, which summarizes his, it went to Hillary, I think, right?
Yeah, there's a letter, from
Yeah.
them
that's-
to
let's
us.
see.
So you've
and-
got it all.
Yeah, and the next piece of it is as a result of the letter, that was the background to develop an RFP to further qualify the Herring River site.
was that the letter
There's a second
from
page
last
to it.
time,
Yeah,
or
yes.
is this a new letter?
Yeah, the second
New
letter.
So,
And I do have one other comment on the Herring River. I did, because I thought of that too. Anytime you propose a site, again, there is no site that's acceptable to everybody. There never will be. It's never happened, it will never happen. So, meaning, there's always another issue. And so transferring the wastewater to the site, I clearly knew would be a concern to the Herring River. So, one thing I did is I looked at the MEP numbers on the nitrogen balance there. I calculated the amount of additional nitrogen that would come after it's treated, because you're right, even though it's treated to a high degree, there's still some nitrogen being added. And that looks to be a fraction of the nitrogen that's going into the groundwater via septic systems within the Herring River watershed. So that means there's a possibility, and again, I'm not proposing this, there would be a possibility to also sewer some of those homes. Looks like it would be about a quarter of them by my quick calculations. And then if you treat that, you would then end up with a net zero nitrogen into the Herring River.
you mean by the time it got there?
Because you're,
Well,
you're
you're-
bringing
Yeah, you're
nitrogen
you're
and
taking
treating
this-
it, but you're also treating nitrogen that's already in the Herring River. So the Herring River would see the same amount of nitrogen that it sees today.
Once you connect the
Yes.
direct residents in that area to a wastewater treatment facility, now you've got an additional 90% reduction of those homes too.
So that would be a possibility.
However, a heavy dose in one place has a very different effect on the mediating ground beneath it than scattered doses.
So
It can overwhelm the
Yes,
site.
yes.
I do have a concern
John,
with
let me
that
just,
site.
John had a
Sorry,
wanted to, he's had his hand up for a while, let's just.
Yeah.
let
sorry,
John-
I have my back turned.
Try a hypothesis out on Scott. If we dredge the inner harbor at low and can show that we can maintain it as dredged, and if, as a consequence of that, we could demonstrate an improvement in the biological health of the inner harbor, even at constant nitrogen, would DEP give us credit for that?
Ultimately, it's the conditions at the so-called Sentinel Station, which is out in the harbor. They picked a place where the...
I know where it is.
Yeah, so if it affects the habitat conditions there, as representing the harbor, then they may say yes.
And I'm confused because you opened the discussion and I was pleased to see you talking about individual watersheds, which I think is the right way to look at things.
It is.
And that's what I'm talking about, fixing one or two
Yeah,
of those watersheds.
So the way the MEP report and model is set up is they model them all as separate bays with the intent on meeting water quality at an identified location. but it also cleans up all of the other embayments. So you're right, and I'm agreeing with you, but there's two different things in the MEP report.
Okay.
And you're asking me what would DEP do? I should just say I don't know. So maybe I don't know, but I'm guessing that they're gonna point to, are you meeting your nitrogen load reductions in each embayment? And are you meeting water quality and habitat quality at the Sentinel station?
So that's the
So
first
two things.
requirement.
Yeah.
At the meeting with DEP, they said the ultimate requirement is the restoration of the health of the habitat.
Right,
So,
right.
so what the makeup of the benthic
Yes.
creatures are,
Yep.
basically, the flora, fauna.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, the nitrogen load, but that has a huge impact, obviously, but it is about fundamentally what is living within the embayment.
Yes.
And different things indicate stress or a system that's impaired, and we have indications on some of the habitat about that.
I think given the fact that we are on track now to begin the dredging, and I believe it's September or October of the coming year, I would think that and we have to have, in order to do that, a maintenance dredging program in place. I think at the 5-year mark you mentioned, we should have a pretty good idea of what effect that's had.
Yeah.
Well, and also if we have, other components, like, for example, some movement on Mayo Creek, and other ecosystem, functional improvements, we're moving everything in the right direction.
So let me ask a question though, is that, okay, so like if we wanted, can we get like some kind of indication from DEP? I know this is like a crazy idea that if we do this, and this is what our plan basically looked like, right? That they'll approve it. Therefore, we could do things in parallel. As we go for approval of the plan, we could also start some of these non-traditional technologies.
There's nothing stopping us right now. As long as it qualifies for the SRF, we could potentially pursue projects, because
But my point being is that I want to make sure that if we do that, they're not going to say, yeah, that's really nice, but with this, it's not. We're not going to conclude it in our plan.
well, it would be like a pilot project. I mean, as Scott
Yeah.
says, they want to see demonstrations. So, you demonstrate that this helps or this works.
And nothing that Scott's proposed this evening wouldn't meet their approval.
I'm just kind of going.
This is all approved.
I'm just
These are-
kind of going. I like to do things in parallel,
Yeah.
going for the permit,
Yeah.
and also starting some of these non-traditional technologies. So we start to that first
Yeah,
5 years.
get ahead of the- get ahead of the problem.
We,
And so that we don't end up with like some kind of like, what are they called? Letter of, a binding letter.
Non-compliance.
Yeah, binding letter of compliance.
Yeah,
This is what you're going to do, Wellfleet. As opposed to, well, we'll work with you.
So I would say that, one of the things is the 208 implementation reports, they want to see progress.
Yes.
And if there's projects that everybody agrees that would be beneficial, even if we don't have a finalized and completed plan, we should look at how to pursue those effectively. Or even if we're waiting for the DEP to approve a plan, we don't know how long it's going to take to get, but if there's something that everybody agrees would be beneficial, I think we should go ahead and pursue it.
Nancy?
I had two questions. A lot of the talk centered around the center of town, and in this plan that we put together though, we're gonna have to include things for Blackfish Creek, for
Yep,
Logie
yep,
Bay, for
yep.
everything. So the plan isn't just gonna focus on one section, because each of the embayments needs to also meet the threshold,
Yes.
okay? So we obviously still have a lot of work to do, because we're thinking about the center of town, but then
Yeah.
we have to also look at all these others, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing is that, and maybe it's hard to say, but what kind of timing are we looking at to obtain a watershed permit from today?
Boy, that's a tough one. I'm always very optimistic about these, but we got a little bit of we got derailed a little bit by DEP's requirement to do the testing on this site. But frankly, I don't think we're more than 6 months away from getting a plan together. that we can submit to DEP that I would guess would have a good chance of getting approved if it has the centralized site in there with the test results that shows that that'll work hydraulically. And some answers to the Herring River question, which is, they've already identified as something. So my point about compensating by sewering supervisors.
Right.
So if that could work out, then I'd say, and I don't think DEP is going to take a long, they want to approve these plans.
Right.
So I don't think they would take more than a couple, 3 months reviewing, maybe editing. I'm an optimist, but I would
Right.
certainly hope we can get this done inside a year. The original plan was 6 to 9 months, and that started almost 6 months ago.
So,
And then that makes me say, okay, so if we get an approved watershed plan, then does your role stay on and work with us? Or I'm thinking about town meeting and then, do we
Yeah.
need a staff person then to take that watershed permit execution and implementation over?
That's the big debate.
Well, I was asked to add some time for public meetings and public participation, because we know that that's going to be a factor. So some of that's in there, but
But ultimately, who's going to manage all
Yeah.
of these aspects that we've just talked about?
Yeah,
They
that's-
touch on so many different areas of jurisdiction within town
right.
now.
Who's going to be in charge?
And
Yeah.
so it needs to be coordinated at an overall level at some,
Yep,
some vantage point.
If we get a watershed permit, we're gonna need somebody, I think,
to administer it.
yes.
Well,
Yeah.
It's good, when you look at that last slide of yours with
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the.
And also, my biggest concern at this point is every single thing that we look at within this plan has drawbacks. There's pluses and minuses to
Yeah.
everything.
Absolutely.
And, as I said earlier, different people are gonna look at it and say, I like that and I don't like this. And at the end of the day, the question is, well, from the available alternatives, there's gonna be some social pushback, but also we need to have a better handle on, what the cost of removal looks like too, so that people can make informed decisions about, is this thing really cost effective or not?
Well, that was
And
my-
then what are the social impacts?
Yeah,
So that was
who does
my-
that cost benefit analysis as we put the before, when we're
Yes.
putting the plan
Yes.
together? Is that what you do?
Yeah,
Provide that?
the Cape Cod Commission, as part of the 208 plan again, and a document called the Technology Matrix, which is, it's like a big spreadsheet on all these technologies, and in there, it includes presumed removal rates. So PRB is like 85%, it's in the, and DEP will accept that number that's in the table. There's also cost information. Now, many of the problem with that is many of those technologies' costs are really site-specific. So they're actually either ranges or averages. PRB is a good example. How deep do you have to drill to get to the water, site by site? But ultimately, the intent would be to boil everything down to a dollar per kilogram removed basis, because that's the best way to compare
That's your benefit
alternatives.
cost, that's your numerator, denominator.
Right, but notwithstanding, there are other co-benefits. I mean, for example, the Herring River and Mayo Creek, they probably are worth doing even if there's no nitrogen removal. They have so many other co-benefits. So that's just $1 per kilogram for nitrogen. But that doesn't mean that the town should pick the lowest one, because there may be other co-benefits associated with others.
But typically when you do a benefit cost analysis, you basically look, okay, if you've got like dollars over dollars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you basically want to see that, like, okay, if your dollars over dollars is one,
Yeah,
better,
yeah, yeah.
you should do it.
Right.
Okay. If it's 2 or 3, you should have done it a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay. But we're doing dollars over kilograms removed, which I'm kind of going, well, how the hell is that a benefit cost analysis?
Well, it's comparative. It's comparative. I mean, the point is,
But how could you get to that one? How can you say that this one is, this one is a better, I suppose it's comparative.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at, just standard benefit cost analysis, it's
I
like,
guess the way you do it is you try to figure out the cost of doing nothing,
yeah.
which is probably the most expensive alternative in the long run.
Or you somehow equate kilograms of nitrogen to a dollar figure.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you would do that.
That's been done to some extent in the previous planning. That's been done by the committee. They've assigned and the Cape Cod Commission as well.
Yeah.
But, a lot of the alternative technologies are site specific, so you do need, you have these baselines kind of, and then you have what it's actually going to cost for that location. But I mean, the alternative, the issue with them is that so much is unknown as to, because they are so site specific, there's a lot of unknowns. You know, they're definitely worth pursuing. But, you know, if you compare it to the cost of sewering a huge amount of the town, it's probably going to be cheaper to try to pursue it with alternatives.
Well, also when you look at benefit cost analysis, traditionally you look at over time.
Yep.
And like you look at like the dollar figures over time.
Yep.
And so like if you have to dump $50 million into a,
Yeah, the long-term maintenance.
and the long-term maintenance, it's like, your benefit cost goes way down.
Yeah.
But when you start doing, okay, well, I'm gonna put a cluster system here this year and a cluster system here in 5 years, and I'm gonna put some of these, alternate technologies, the wax in the
PRBs.
ground and the wood chips along the shore, it's like, okay, well, that's a much more, that benefit cost analysis will, just because you're doing things over years and you're plugging money in over the years, it's just gonna naturally make the benefit cost much better.
Yeah. And one thing I would like to bring up is if that is the time frame that we're discussing, we really need to engage specifically with Eastham, but also with Truro. But Eastham, we really do need to engage with. And what is the best way to engage with Eastham?
So Hillary's already talked with both those health agents, and the net of it was kind of, her expectation was that, they would chip in some kind of contribution to whatever our plan is.
Okay, well, I would say it would be good to have them come to a meeting.
Well, and
so that we can have a.
And the other thing is to get them to commit to writing,
Yep.
in terms of what they might be willing to do or not to do. But we're still, my big concern right now is that we also have a real challenge with every element to make sure it's reasonable to be in the plan. What's the feasibility of if oysters are going to be included in here? What's that look like? If we're going to do PRBs and we're going to do injection sites, what's that going to look like? So for each of these technologies, we kind of have to have, DPW needs to be engaged. There's a number of other parts of town administration that need to be involved and bought in. If there's going to be a wastewater treatment facility at the transfer station, we need to be talking with the Herring River Committee, about what that looks like. If we're going to do alternative septic systems, wood chip or any of the three alternatives that Scott's presented, we need to be talking to the Board of Health in terms of how they might be viewing that. So this type of plan is very messy because it involves a lot of different constituencies and they're not tied together by anything. And so that's my biggest concern, is how we can kind of begin the process to put this together.
Which gets to the public messaging.
Yeah, John?
Just a basic question, I might have missed it. 400,000 gallons per day, is that the potential treatment at the proposed landfill site?
Yes, 400.
In what area of town does that include in the survey?
That'd be the whole town.
It'd be 450,000.
That's if we had to sewer.
It's not every parcel. What the commission did is they looked at the removal rates for each embayment and looked at a potential sewered area for each one of those, and then tied all that together. So it includes, if you can picture it, pods and it's not intended to be a proposed sewering plan. It's just proposed to be how much you need to do in each embayment, because the real number we wanted to know is how much would you need to put at the plant to achieve the MEP thresholds, and that's how they derived the 400,000 number.
I mean, I do have a concern, some of you already know this, with that site in regards to the volume of fresh water. And it would be primarily entering in Pole Dyke, which has a lower flow than the Herring River as a whole, which might have an impact on the salinity within that area, which would limit it could impact the restoration of that part of the river. It's very unlikely that it's 450,000 gallons will go there. We all know that, but just in terms of having a rough idea about how much that is, that represents roughly a 6% increase and the total flow volume for the Herring River as a whole. But Upper Pole Dike is a much smaller tributary, so it might have an impact there.
But that's where we can engage with the committee and some of the other
Is that based on the
experts.
water table map? And that's the direction of flow to Pole Dike Creek and not to the main stem of Herring River? I don't know for sure, but you're at the divide there, and I think you need to look closely at the water table map.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's upper pole dike and lower pole
Yeah.
dike. The main basin will definitely be impacted.
Well, either way, but I'm wondering
The upper basin,
whether,
no, because that's mainly fresh water coming out there
Yes.
anyway. So, you know,
Yeah, the question, I tried to say this earlier, the question to think about now is, for the plan, if you want to get on a plan, is do we make the presumption, we, the town, make the presumption it's all going to go at transfer station and identify the impact assessments that need to be done, Herring River. It would be done not today, but if we get serious about it.
Yeah.
And part of that could be, and would be, if there's an impact that's deemed unacceptable by the town, then you go to another site for either part of or all of it. That's one option. The other option is the town evaluates multiple sites now and tests multiple sites.
It's expensive.
So it depends on whether you want to spend more now and how detailed you want to get now. That's the question.
And
that's up to the town. You could evaluate 5 sites.
And the transfer
Test them
station
all.
already has the most hydrological testing done on it.
Yeah, and it's been identified in 3 engineering reports as a likely site. So all things equal, it looks like a reasonable place, but the Herring River question is an important one.
yeah, and also, let's say, you know, we provide the transfer station to the DEP as something they require, and then we change our minds, and we never then go further with using the money, which was one of my earlier questions that I didn't ask because I'm controlling myself but barely. So how much does it cost to vet the transfer station?
You know, I gave Hillary our scope of work to put out for bid. So until we see those bids, I hesitate.
What are we doing? We're doing perk tests.
Perk test, but also put in, actually what Brian Dudley called for is what he calls slug test, which is a
Yeah.
little different.
Yeah.
You basically put in a well and you put water in the well and watch how
Yeah.
slowly it goes down.
Yeah, I get
So
it.
it's basically a wet perk test, if you
Yeah.
think of it that way.
Yeah,
And-
the bottom line is just like, he gave
Yeah.
us a list of things he wanted to do. He wanted, right? And there, I just kind of looked, we went through them and I was like, well, this isn't like, this isn't huge dollars.
No, I think it's 5 digits, it's not 6 digits. I can tell you that much, but.
Oh, yeah. And I would say,
I don't wanna-
just for my, having estimated lots and lots and lots of projects, it's probably less than $50,000.
Yeah, oh yeah. I
I'd
would think
probably
so.
say even less than 20, if you
So,
really got down to
Could
it.
we see just briefly, once again, the map with all those other sites you looked at, remember?
Did I show it tonight?
Yeah.
But- but-
For the
Just
EPG.
take a
They,
quick read.
Oh, yeah,
they
yeah.
weren't really,
Whoop, this one.
There we
all,
go.
Yeah.
all of them weren't really investigated.
That's right.
The primary ones that were the DPW facility and borrow pit and the transfer station. However, 2002, the Woodward and Curran also identified two additional potential sites that are not on that map. One is the golf course, which might have issues. And the other one is out on.
We don't own it, like we don't own it.
Yeah. The other one was out
Question,
on
might
the
have to
ocean
question.
side, to the south of. It's pretty close to 4 Mile, I think, is where I
Yeah, what-
identified.
What is this site? I've been wondering, what is that site there?
Cemetery.
Cemetery.
What EPG did though was they went through both the Woodward, they went through all the reports and looked at all the sites and then applied, their good engineering judgment in terms of flows from centers as well. So where's your sewage going to be coming from and what's downhill?
Yep.
What minimizes pumping requirements for any of these sites? And so that's why the transfer station site became one of the more favored ones. And the other is, back to Helen, your other question, if we're going to start to evaluate another site, then you're going to start adding zeros in terms of
Oh, you add a lot of
a
zeros.
lot of zeros in terms
I
of what the
understand.
evaluation cost is, because
So-
those sites don't have any, they have very little of the data that would be required
Yeah.
But
compared
our
to the
goal right
transfer
now is a
station.
watershed permit,
Yeah.
right? And I think, we kind of have to go the path of least resistance. And that's the path of least resistance. And like you said, it's a plan. Okay, and in the interest of time, because we've been doing this for 2 hours, I kind of like to move along on the concept of, okay, we want to get a plan done. We need to message all the different parts of this plan to a whole slew of different people, and that might be something that we have to talk about in another meeting, right? Because that messaging is extremely important, because you pointed out at least 5 different groups that we would have to message to and hear their consideration of the different technologies. But towards the goal of, hey, we want to get a plan, we want to get a permit in hand in 6 months, what do we need to do to get that plan, right? And also, let's start being excited about some of these alternate technologies that are going to be way more cost effective, cost beneficial, benefit cost analysis wise than all the rest of them, right? How is there a possibility of investing in those? How could the town invest in those? Is this a town warrant article? Can we go after, what is it? What is that fund that we have?
The Water Protection Fund?
No, the
Community preservation, CPI?
the
Airbnb tax fund.
no, it's the
That's a good one.
money every time you do a transaction in real estate, there's a fund that you can use for different things.
Community
Yeah.
preservation, CPI. Yeah.
Yeah, Community Preservation Act, there's 3 things you can use it for: historical preservation, recreation, and wasn't the third housing? Does this fall into the housing realm? Because we have to do housing requires septics.
I don't think so.
Not really. Only if you're doing a development could it be considered,
Okay, I'm just trying to think of like where we could find funds to start to test some of these alternate technologies.
That's a
So-
whole other discussion, my friend.
What?
But
I wanted to-
And I just want to say one thing about, so as we, or as you, or as the town is bringing these ideas to the general public as well, one thing that as a taxpayer I would want to know is, okay, if we choose this, how much is that? And we just talked a little bit about the cost benefit analysis. But when we go out, we should probably have that information
Yeah.
to say, this is going to cost this much, this is going to cost this much, traditional sewering is going to cost that much. Because that's also, you kind of you have to weigh things out. And so it might move you more in one direction if you knew it was actually going to cost a ton less in terms of how many taxes I'm gonna pay. But, so that's just information that I'm looking for as we take this out as a town to different entities, what are things gonna cost?
And how soon can we have that, Scott? By January, maybe?
Yeah, once we select alternatives, there is unit cost information on all this stuff now, but it's general, it's not site
But
specific.
if we put a plan together,
Yeah,
if we put a plan together, like a couple of different plans that people
Yeah,
could look
yeah,
at and choose
yeah.
from, maybe that's too much of a task. But, if we used a lot of these INA, this would be the price tag.
Yeah,
If we
yeah.
did this would be, because there is gonna be some mixing and matching going on.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand what choices cost what.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what are the results,
Yeah.
obviously.
And the basic
We mix
driver
and
is,
match.
the basic driver is how much, what can you get for reduction in kilograms, okay? And what's it gonna cost you?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking
meet the
for.
target.
yeah, that information, I can get that, yeah.
Speaking of costs, and sort of along those lines, it's probably way too early in the process now to have an idea, but at some point before it goes on the town meeting warrant, I would think, as a homeowner, we're gonna need to have some vague idea at least of what it's going to cost us individually if we're required to hook into such a system.
It'll probably be multiple segments, rather than one big warrant article. It'll be like, this part of a project is gonna cost this much, especially with the way the adaptive management works, where we have a 5-year cycle of, the first 5 years test, the second 5 years determine what worked and what didn't. And it's not gonna be one lump sum unless it goes the sewer direction, which everybody's really hesitant about going that way, because it would cost significantly more than if we can address a lot of these issues with non-traditional technologies.
But put simply, whatever's in a watershed permit, okay, we will have a cost associated with that, and phasing with sources coming from a variety of different buckets, right? Does that make sense? So some of it's going to come from town meeting authorization, some of it may come from SRF, some may come from grant funding that's available, some may come from, for example, the 95 Lawrence Road. If that project moves forward and we are developing that housing project, there could be additional funding that could be available from another source to assist. So I think the funding buckets are going to be varied, but at the end of the day, the plan is going to have a price tag, and that plan has to meet DEP's nitrogen reduction target. That's the first most important thing, and it's going to look like a variety of different funding sources and a variety of different technologies
I think Scott said
over
best
a
too.
10 to 15 or 20 year period.
The plan isn't gonna have like a set amount, will be an estimate
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah.
It's not.
Does that make sense, John?
But Scott said it best, no matter what technology we choose, there's someone who's not gonna like it.
And some stuff is not going to work.
Yeah.
And some stuff is not going to work.
Right, that, to my mind, that's the most important thing. Work in the long run,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So if it costs a whole lot of money and it works well in the long run, not for the satisfaction of the DEP, but for actually dealing with what's going into our watersheds, this town, you can sell it to, But if it's this pie in the sky stuff, I'm a little disturbed by the idea of 5 figures going to vetting the transfer station and it never being used. I would rather have that money. I understand the whole reason for it. I got it. I'm not fighting that.
Yeah.
But it hurts me as a budget person to think about that money being spent and wasted when it could be spent on other parts of this project.
So one thing with that is that with the SRF, generally the state forgives 25% of the loan, is that correct?
It depends what you're proposing.
So for testing the transfer station, it would be considered wastewater related and could qualify
Yeah.
as part of the state SRF program. So they usually forgive around 25%, and then there's the Cape Cod Water Protection Fund, which just started, and
Yeah, but let me stop you there, because at least for this RFP, the town's already approved money, and to go after any of those other sources would take an enormous amount of time to get the funding.
The other thing is, this is the cost of doing business.
Yep.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
it's just like we want a permit. The cost of doing business is that we have to do more testing here. It is probably the least cost alternative as to go and let's test all these other lovely yellow spots out there. Let's go for the least cost alternative. It's a plan.
Yeah.
And then, it's the cost of doing business. And I don't like I don't like taking money and digging a hole in the ground and covering it up. But think about what basically every restaurant in this town has done at least 3 times in my time I've been here. They have dug a hole in the ground, poured money in it, and filled it up, and that lasted 5-10 years, and then they had to do it again. Okay? And that didn't come from town coffers,
I think this has been a good discussion. I want to make sure that are there any other questions from the audience? We're going to move on to some of the other agenda items here, but if people had something else they wanted to raise or bring up, I just want to make sure everybody's got a chance to say something if they want to.
What date is the forum?
We don't have one, we'll have to talk about that.
Okay, but there will be other opportunities to discuss
Yeah.
this. So it's not this one time only.
No. I mean, like, I'm just basically saying is, we got to move forward,
Yep.
and moving forward means, okay, we want a permit, okay, which is a plan, right? And plans change, but once we have that permit, and we also have to put the big thing now is messaging what we're trying to do here. And the big message is, this is a plan to get a permit. Okay, once we have that permit, we gotta move forward with some of these other technologies and try to get there without having to bite the big bullet, which is that $50 million sewage treatment plant.
150.
150. We going to 150 now?
Well, at the scope change from all the watersheds contributing, the 50 was originally just to do the central district.
Okay, well, what, the bottom line
It's a
is,
big
is
number.
like, I don't know what the big number really is, but it's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money that I point to is like, we're gonna spend a lot of money, and everyone says, oh yeah, that'll take care of the problem. I don't think it will. You know?
No, I think the basic goal the DEP had in the first instance was right, and that's restoring ecosystem function. And again, it's a supply-demand balance. And we've got to balance the resources in the harbor, and it's not just what. Well, probably only about 1/3 of what goes into the harbor is human contribution. Even though when Scott uses the 80% figure, talking about nitrogen contribution, that's considered controllable nitrogen, meaning human controlled. In other words, coming from land that we have jurisdiction over. But if you look at the scientific research around contributions from all the other different elements, there's a big natural component, and if we don't address that, we're not going to fix the problem.
There's a big natural component, but it's not 80% of the load is coming from natural sources. The majority of the load is coming from human-caused sources of
Yeah,
nitrogen.
that I would just, we can talk about that at another time. There's a lot of scientific data on, and for example, the recent report that was done at the Harbor Conference, which talked about the black mayo and what the source of that is. There's clear scientific data around the fact that much of the nitrogen in the harbor is of natural origin. There is certainly a human component, but at the end of the day, it's not really a question of which one is which. The issue is that if we don't use a balanced approach, we're not going to fix the problem. Building a sewer is probably not going to fix the problem.
All right, well, can we, for the sake of time, move on to
Other
the
business?
next agenda item?
Okay.
So the next thing here is, public outreach effort, and Fred, you started to tee that up.
Well, I teed that up because we talked about it at the last meeting, basically, we talked about messaging. How are we messaging what we're doing, okay? And you teed up like, okay, these are the 5 or 6 different places. You got, the shell fishermen, you've got, and the shellfish people to be more politically correct. And then you've got, the Herring River folks, we have the, you named off like the 6 of them in a row, so I'll let you remember that.
Well, what Hillary, right now what we've got at least preliminarily outlined is a public outreach effort to the Board of Selectmen and town staff. Hillary's working on trying to get a meeting that would engage those folks. She put out a doodle poll to try to get a group of folks internally together to start talking more about this. The forum has committed to do a forum as soon as we want to present something, which we could do probably in January. But I think as Nancy said and some others and John, we've really got to have, to be able to do that, we've got to have cost numbers. We've got to be able to talk intelligently about, what these things really look like, so people can start to wrap their brains around what we might want to be prioritizing or not. And I think until you have that, you really can't.
Well, I would be for prioritizing the permeable reactive barriers as something that we could present and have, we can get a pretty good cost estimate on that pretty quickly. Because using the trench method, because the costs are pretty much known, or the well injection well.
I think Scott committed to get it all done by January. Because you want to look at everything together. I think it's important.
But we really need, when we present, we need to...
One thing is not going to, looking at just the cost of permeable reactive barriers isn't going to...
But we have to be able to present action, like that this is an example. If you're just using, conceptual ideas, it's a lot harder to get across to people than saying, this is an example that we're going to try right here.
No, I think
So we
what's-
got the town staff, we got the forum, who else do we wanna, go to this public, outreach?
We have to talk to the other towns.
The other towns, that's a very good point.
Yeah, and that is something that DEP says that we can get a watershed permit without the other towns signing on, but that is not their recommendation whatsoever, that we should engage with the other towns as early as possible to figure out, because it's gonna take a little while to figure out, what's what. Is that?
Yeah, guys, so I have been having quite a few experiences with one of the members of the select board knowing more than others about something important. And it is to be avoided at all costs. And a simple method of simply anything, your internal communications committee, right? Like that letter that came out of the meeting you had 2 weeks ago. Just copy the select board, right? You copy, of course Hillary gets it. Hillary should be here tonight, I think. She's your staff support. Maybe she doesn't need to, maybe she knows all this.
She
Has
doesn't work
Hillary seen
Mondays.
all this?
Yeah, she and Scott are in close communication. We actually talked about
I-
this.
Hillary's seen
I sent her a copy of this today.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, but the point is, what I really don't want, this is just me, is getting closer to town meeting, getting to a place where you guys have a clear idea of things. And I agree with Nancy, you've got to know figures. But even this amount to know, the others aren't aware of it. And it's a really bad thing to happen.
Who's the others?
The 5 select board members, I'm the only person who's here.
Right.
So we
Well-
need to have a message to the select.
And not like kind of
Well-
after the fact.
So, but that was the idea behind having these 2 meetings that we're talking about now. One being the forum and the other being, town staff, be it Board of Selectmen, invite meeting specifically for the Board of Selectmen.
But
Other
I'm
town-
talking not about
So-
meetings, because not all the select board may come to that. I'm talking about copying with data, okay, as it's going along. And that's pretty normal for a project like this. There's
Yep.
no secrets here.
So I would like to kind of second that, and I would really appreciate any contact between you and the DEP or Hillary and the other towns for the entire committee to be informed, or as it happens, rather than getting it secondhand.
Yeah. So I have 2 comments. First of all, my primary contact is Hillary. I send everything to Hillary, and then she distributes, or...
Sometimes she does.
She-
Okay.
She
But
hasn't
I
distributed any.
I certainly can't be responsible for
No.
contacting everybody in town, yeah.
It's however this committee decides to
Yes,
do it. But
yes.
as the chair of the committee, or you could delegate it to somebody else. The point is, what's to be avoided, and however it gets dealt
Yeah.
with, is not to have this information being given all at once. There's a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah.
right?
So-
All at once to 4 people, I'm here,
Yeah,
4 other people who have to take it all in
yeah.
at one time. It's really not a good thing. It's too important. Please.
So my second suggestion would be, Orleans went through a very good process. They went through it 3 times. They finally got it through. And I participated in the Orleans process quite a bit. I went to most of their meetings. And they had, I don't know how many meetings they had. I'm just going to guess and say 20 to 30 meetings over a year and a half period. And I'm not suggesting you need that many, but that's what they did. And they used a website, part of the town's website, dedicated to the project to post materials, because frankly, there's a pretty big volume of materials already in existence, and there'd be more. And I think putting them in a centralized place that everybody knows about really worked well for Orleans. So that might be something else to consider.
But you can't guarantee that the other people on the select board are going to go to it.
So that was my next question.
Yeah.
My next question was what worked best for Orleans? Because I have, I don't know how many SharePoint sites that are used by agency.
Yeah.
And some, and some of them just get filled up with stuff that nobody ever looks at.
Right.
So I'm kind of going, and I can't tell you how the importance of face-to-face time with everyone, where you do things like, okay, guys, this is what we this was a great presentation. This was like, okay, can we do that for all these different groups?
Yeah.
You know? And because it says, you know, it tells them basically in a nutshell, this is what we're looking at, right? It has pictures of the different technologies, the ideas, an example of like, okay, it went from, except for the people that are colorblind, it went from green to red to green, which says, okay, it seems to be working.
Yeah.
So the point being is that we need to talk to the other towns. We need to make sure the selectmen understand what's going on. We need to know how town staff understand. We need to know, you know, the shell fishermen and women are informed of like, you know, what this is all about. Who else is there out there that is going to be wanted to know about all of this?
Pretty much every town.
The forum, you know, so the forum,
you know,
Non-resident taxpayers, like everybody, because it affects.
But the reality is that over the last 5 or 6 years, and Pat's been here through just about all of it, we've probably done how many maybe 75, 100 meetings, you know, throughout the process, trying to engage, and obviously the challenge is to continue to do that and to figure out ways to continue to
I know, but I'm
engage.
looking at a timeline of 6 months to get a permit, right? Or a plan for
Get the
a
plan together to submit, right?
to plan to submit, and then another 3 months for review, and then I can already hear the people saying, "You never told me about this."
Yeah.
So I mean, like, it basically means that we have to turn up our public outreach effort, turn up the dial on our public outreach effort pretty
I mean,
significantly.
6 months might be too
I'll invite you
aggressive.
guys to the Shellfish Association. We can get a lot of people there, and we can do the SAB. Invite
Sure.
them,
Sure.
Get everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I can guarantee you these 50 people.
Yeah, if you get the SAB to post the
And
meeting,
the selectmen.
invite the WSA. But you see, this meeting, you guys are doing what you do, it's your committee, but I would have aggressively done outreach to all the groups you just mentioned. So, you know, John showed up, that was good. But you cannot try too hard right now if you've got this short period of time.
I think that's what we're trying to do.
Okay,
And
but who was informed about this on all those groups?
so the distribution went out to several people in town. Ginny got a copy. John, the two Johns, you got. So you know, we've tried to engage a number of people. We obviously are taping this evening to make it more publicly available, and I think we're just going to continue to reach out and listen to people and see what they need.
I think if we set our meeting schedules well ahead of time, that would help matters as well.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult getting everybody to meet at a certain time, but if we can say, you know, a week or 2 weeks out from a meeting that it's going to happen on this date, and these are the people that will be there.
Christmas
Yeah.
Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve. I think that would be the way to go about it if we can. I know it's been difficult based on people's schedules, but you know, and I really think that we do need to involve Hillary.
Hillary's involved. Hillary knows everything that's going on.
I mean,
So basically, you know, the public outreach effort.
Hillary's more worried about what the public being informed. She's very well informed.
I don't know. She needs to. I mean, we need to see her. It can't just be like, you know, a mystery.
Well, then we can't do it we can't have meetings on Monday nights
Yeah.
because she doesn't. But I mean, we didn't have a choice on this.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say that I'm willing and very happy to meet with whoever, what group, how many times you want. Because I think it's a really important process. But I do agree with some of the comments being made. It would be nice to have a somewhat regular schedule, monthly, every other month meeting. It's going to be on Wednesday nights, or you guys can decide. But have some, and maybe have 2 different times, because some people can't always make night versus day.
Yeah, and
You got-
tides. Yeah.
But have a schedule, and then I can work with that schedule. I can commit to updates. And by the way, the 6 month, again, I told you I'm optimistic.
Yeah, but that's
EP is not saying it has to be done in 6 months. What I'm saying is it could be done in 6 months if.
Yeah, but I'd rather you know, shoot for the 6 months,
get
do
it
all the
done.
outreach,
Right.
and then if it takes 9 months,
Right,
well, at least
right.
we've got the outreach done.
Yeah.
you know, or at least we've tried,
Yeah, right.
okay?
Take it from me about the Herring River Project, which I've been sitting in on in different ways for over 10 years. You really want to have it, in terms of informing people, happen in less time without too much of a rush. Because in 3 years, there'll be a whole lot of people who have either forgotten.
And that's what's actually happened to us now,
Yeah, we go, yeah.
but that's okay.
No, that happens. That
Well, we're
happens.
dealing, for example, with, there's not one member of the Shellfish Advisory Board today that was on the Shellfish Advisory Board when this committee went to that committee and talked about,
Jane was on,
I think that's right, John was, you're right.
Yeah.
But the institutional, you're right, you're exactly right. The institutional memory disappears in about, as you lose people, so you're exactly right, trying to,
So in the interest of time, since we're now turning into 2.5 hours on this, right? Shall we go on to the next, we have, I think we've all agreed that we have to turn up the dial on these public outreach efforts.
Is there a unified message that we can kind of deliver?
We're doing something.
I like that message right there. I like what we saw tonight. It was a really clear concept of what we're trying to do.
Okay, Scott, can you make that available? And we'll try to get Hillary to post it on the town website.
I did send it to Hillary and I've given it to Kurt here, so.
yeah, I'll get it on the town website.
Okay.
Send it to me, and then we'll just start sending it out to everybody we know. I'm not joking.
Yeah, I mean, if you
No.
send a document to Kurt, you need to send it to all of us.
Yeah, we'll get it all. So, so that's the start, and then we're focusing. Like I said, if we focus on the other towns, the forum, the select board for sure, and
Herring River.
the
Herring River Committee.
the Herring River
And the-
Committee,
and the Board
and
of
the
Health.
shellfish, the shellfish people.
Do we want to divide up the tasks of trying to lasso all these people?
Hillary's working on a town staff and Board of Selectmen meeting. I'm working on forum. Scott's agreed and Ginny's offered to do a,
WSA.
Yeah.
so
Whatever
just,
you need to.
Good.
yeah, just let us, January? Perfect.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll just try to get in touch and set up a time.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Anybody want to work on the Herring River Committee?
I'll reach out to the Herring River Committee
Um,
and the Friends of Herring River. And
do you want to do finance?
I volunteer, but I'm not gonna be around.
Can you just get in touch with them though and see what would work for them schedule-wise?
Kurt, one thought here is to have each group identify a representative and a backup, and then have
Have them
that
try to
could be a
come to the
point
meeting.
person, and let them distribute and talk with their group.
do we want them to come to our meetings or?
Well, I'm envisioning, and by the way, I'm going to meet with Erin Perry tomorrow at the commission tomorrow morning to talk exactly about this public participation plan, because they're pretty good at that. And what I'm guessing she's going to suggest is have a lead committee, and it might be this committee, probably identified formally by the Board of Select people, and have that be the committee that's in charge of this project. And then have expanded committee with representatives from all the interest groups. So it would be not just this committee, but, no? Okay.
Yeah, what works, and this worked for years on the Shellfish Committee.
Yep.
Right, and it has worked more recently is, so you guys host a meeting, and you tell everybody, not just the chair, on all these different committees, and you invite all of them, and you do it at the COA, and you give them enough time, and you don't do it as a forum, so that it's officially your committee. And by the way, that meets a requirement. Doesn't the DEP want you to do that kind of public outreach? Isn't that part of the?
Oh, absolutely. They definitely want
public-
that.
So you
For sure,
haven't
please.
actually done one of those since, I believe, what was it, 2014 or 12? And it works very well with the shellfish community, and you could pull the shellfish community into it. But you guys host it, you post it, it's an open meeting, and you do it with enough fetch so that everybody knows about it. And you
Yeah.
look at the tides before you do it.
The other thing though that I want to be careful
bring
about,
food.
and yeah, bring food. The other thing I want to be careful about though is using people's time wisely. And part of what we're trying to do tonight, and I think what's clear is we need another meeting of the committee, even just to start to look at financial numbers, and to talk about messaging, so that we have sort of a, consistent kind of a message that we're providing to people as we go to different groups. There's one element is us doing our due diligence and doing our work as a committee to understand, to vet, to work on the elements of what the plan needs to look like. And then the other is communicating that. So in some sense, sometimes we're looking for input, sometimes we're actually out there doing a road show, and it depends.
The New Year's Eve wastewater party, wastewater committee party and forum.
So I think from my standpoint is we want to talk to everybody, and we want to get lots of input, but we also don't want to waste people's time, and we want to, I think, have clear objectives for the meetings that we're going to have and for the groups that we're going to be talking to.
Oh, yeah.
And so, not to be Pollyannish about it. The finance committee is kind of a very different set of needs.
Yeah, they're gonna want numbers.
Than the Shellfish Advisory Board or the Wellfleet Shellfishermen's Association.
Yeah, here's
So.
what happens. So, over the years, I've had a number of things I've had to follow closely. And if I go to the FinCom, I get one set of questions answered. This is me not belonging to any of these groups. If I come to this meeting, I get another set. If I go to a shellfish meeting, and here I am sitting on the select board at the moment, and every time that happens with me, I wish the others were there because there's information they don't get at the next meeting. Do you see what I mean, Kurt?
Right, but we're trying to reach out to folks, and we can't twist people's arms to show up to meetings. They're going to show up if they want to show up. Right.
There's a lot of information that may work well. I'm not saying you shouldn't do the other thing.
Yeah, I think we just, what I'm trying to say is I think we need to do all of the above. And if we do all of the above, we're going to hopefully get to more people in town and have at least try to do what we can.
Heavy.
It's a very heavy lift all the time. So anyway, we've identified the meetings: town staff, forum, shellfish, Wellfleet Shellfishermen's Association, SAB, Heron River Committee, Board of Health, and the Finance Committee. Anything else?
Well, there's other stuff that comes up, but I
That's
think
at least a preliminary.
Yeah, but the other part about it is that I understand that we want to craft each of these things to the different audiences, but I think we're...
Well, actually, we're going to do, I think what we're talking about is doing Scott's
Yeah,
presentation,
it'd
water
just be
quality, and, getting more specific financial information into the presentation.
Exactly, but I mean, the thing is that, we're not gonna be, it's gonna be pretty generic, at least at first. So-
Right, yeah, no, I'm not talking about doing a different presentation for everybody. It's just, they'll all have different issues. and
Yeah, let's just do
concerns.
as what's been presented
Does that make
already
sense?
here.
Yeah. So, in the interest of time, since we're now at 2.5 hours, the minutes, can we move on to the minutes?
Do we have copies of them?
Is this from the last meeting?
Yeah.
This one.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Scott, thank you very much. That
Thank
was
you.
great.
Great conversation.
I think it was a great conversation. What was the conversation?
Anybody have any questions on the minutes? Comments?
We voted on the videotaping of meetings.
It says videotape consensus appeared to be the board is willing to have some meetings videotaped.
We voted on it, it's different than a consensus. So, we all voted to have the video, or have the meetings videotaped. That would be my, a vote, I don't remember who made the motion, but we took a vote on a motion, to allow videotaping of the meetings.
Anybody remember making a motion?
I wasn't here.
Don't recall.
So you did it, Patrick.
I must have, yeah.
We took a vote on it, you know, we all said aye.
Okay, so instead of saying consensus appeared to be, then we could just say we voted.
Yep, voted.
So
Simple
just change,
Yep.
just one simple change, okay, that's
Yeah,
fine.
and it was unanimous, so, but, you know,
Unanimous vote that the board is willing.
yep.
Okay, one change to the minutes, I move that we make one change to the minutes. Anybody second that?
Second.
Well, in order to have a motion, I mean, to have something like that, we have to have somebody made a motion and somebody seconded it.
Okay, I move that we make one change to this minutes.
I second it.
All those agreed?
Aye.
Okay, and that change will be that there was a unanimous, so the consensus appeared to be, it was read, unanimous vote that the board is willing to have some meetings videotaped. Okay. So I move that we approve the minutes with that change.
Second.
All in favor?
Is there a second?
No. I don't think you should say some. It's kind of like all or nothing, because otherwise, before each meeting, we'll have to have a discussion about whether or not to videotape it. So if we say the board was willing to have some meetings videotaped, it means it's still discretionary.
That's what we voted.
But then we'll have to have a conversation before every meeting to,
We can't go back in time.
Well, you can make
You
it-
wanted to.
I mean, we can
vote
do it,
today?
we can do a different motion, we can, you know, today, we can, leave it
just
as
approving
is.
minutes.
This is just the minutes.
but a vote is, you know, important to have on minutes.
Okay,
You
so,
can make another
well,
motion.
let's
That's what I said.
approve the
Okay,
minutes.
yep.
Let's approve,
With the
so,
vote.
okay, so all approving, it. So we've moved and we've seconded approving the minutes as written, even though we were gonna talk about one section of it at a later date.
Well, it's the minutes have been moved and seconded with the one correction.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Can't vote on these.
If anybody would like to make another motion with regard to videotaping, you're more than welcome to do that.
Okay, I make a motion just for the sake of clarity, that we allow our meetings to be videotaped.
Okay.
That's a second.
Second?
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Terrific.
So let me just point out we're not always gonna have a videotaper here or available, right?
Right,
okay,
but if the videotaper is available,
Being the videotaper,
Yeah.
you're not always available, right?
We can talk about that off camera.
and there will be scheduling conflicts too, probably,
Okay, got
two
it.
meetings at the same time.
So, speaking of which, with regard to scheduling future meetings,
Oh, can we just motion to approve the minutes?
we did.
We just
We already
We
voted.
did?
Yeah.
Okay.
You voted
Sorry.
unanimously. What would be the best in terms of trying to set a regular schedule?
To not try to include me on your regular schedule.
Well, I would say
Because it would work half the time probably.
to try to do it on.
Well, right now I'm seeing, you know, we've always done, our regularly scheduled meetings have been evening meetings. So trying to do a daytime meeting is tough for Fred, it's tough for me, it's tough for you, and it's sometimes tough for Richard, so, and I don't know about you.
It depends.
So what I'm getting at is if we maybe pick an evening time that's our regularly scheduled time, at least we have something that we know we can agree to meet. And if we want to try to do something for a daytime meeting specifically, you know, we'll propose that. We do have, you know, Hillary's right now out with, you know, her doodle poll to try to get this, you know, staff and board of selectmen to a daytime type meeting in January. I don't know, how do you feel, how do other people feel about this?
About.
When to schedule a meeting and how to schedule meetings?
Give you a tie chart with you?
Yeah, daytime meeting in January will be tricky for me, just with the pitting. it's gonna be kind of all consuming, usually, around that time of year.
You're gone. How about you?
It's sort of like it depends on the day, you know. I mean, like I can definitely try to make time for it.
What's the best day for you?
Fridays are usually the best day for me to be in town and working from home or partially working from home.
Anybody have a problem with that?
No. We could also alternate, one month do a daytime meeting and 1 month do a evening.
I mean, are you talking about nighttime meetings or daytime meetings?
I'm talking about nighttime meetings.
Oh, nighttime meetings any night.
Okay, so daytime would be Friday.
For daytime would be Friday.
So for the, do you want to try to schedule another meeting before, I mean, Hillary's got this thing, she's trying to get a meeting in January with town staff during the day. Do we want to try to do another meeting in December to talk about, maybe get a draft from Scott on costs and messaging?
I think if we
Because
can
we
move
kind
forward
of-
as fast as we can, that would be, so we can get it over and done with. Avoid the summer.
So I would say that
It's going for me, it would have to be after,
Christmas.
yeah.
Yeah, it'd have to be after Christmas to be. If we would have to be like
Like Friday.
New Year's Eve.
So like Friday the 27th or
Yeah.
or the first week of January.
Well, I'd like to, I mean, it would probably be best to do it like the 26th or the 27th. Or the 30th.
I'm thinking the following week's going to be the easiest.
The 30th or 31st.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New Year's Eve. We do
Well,
New Year's Eve.
if we do it on Friday, that would be the 3rd. That's enough time to, unless we're traveling. I don't know.
I'm most likely not gonna be able to get to this one. It's gonna
Okay.
have, between December 15th and like January 20th. It's pretty much,
You're flat out.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. So if we did Friday the 30th,
Monday the 30th or Tuesday the 31st, we're still in December. Otherwise, we're going into
The first week of
3rd,
January.
First week of January.
It's up to you guys, I'm fine either way. Whatever
If you do
works
Monday,
best.
then Hillary doesn't work. right?
Yep.
So,
So she
Tuesday,
won't
New
do a
Year's
couple
Eve.
meetings.
What, New Year's Eve?
New Year's Eve.
No,
All
that's-
right out of here, right?
no, why don't we shoot for Friday,
The 3rd?
Friday the 3rd during the day,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is January 3rd. And I will contact Hillary for what would be a good time so that she could try to make that meeting.
Okay.
Fred would be available, I would be available, and you would be available, so we
Yes.
would have a quorum, but it would have to be, the three of us would all have to be
You'd have to
available.
show up.
Would he be available?
can't, no,
No.
he can't make it and he can't make it.
Okay,
So-
so right now, I can do anything on that day.
Okay?
I
So,
will do anything on that.
so we'll plan on that being the day, and I will consult with Hillary on the time and let everybody know.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we got that done.
Motion,
And then in the future, I guess we'll try to figure out like Friday, if it works well for everybody.